Ryan Carter never expected that saving a billionaire would cost him everything he'd spent 3 years protecting. At Chicago's most exclusive corporate gala, surrounded by champagne and fake laughter, he watched Vivian Sterling, the city's most powerful woman, slowly unravel while predatory investors circled closer. One choice, one moment, and suddenly, the invisible single father who only wanted to survive became the one person standing between a broken empire and complete destruction. But when you rescue someone who has everything, what happens when she decides she wants the one thing money can't buy? This is their story. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. Ryan Carter straightened his rented tie for the fourth time in 10 minutes, trying not to think about how much the deposit had cost. The grand ballroom of the Langham Hotel stretched before him like some kind of fever dream. Crystal chandeliers the size of compact cars, ice sculptures melting slowly beside champagne fountains, and enough designer suits to fund Sophie's college education 3 times over. He didn't belong here. Never had. Never would. Mr. Carter, his boss, Gerald Patterson, appeared at his elbow with that sharp smile that always preceded something terrible. Remember, visibility. The partners are watching. Translation: don't embarrass me or you're unemployed by Monday. Ryan nodded, took the champagne flute he didn't want, and disappeared into the crowd before Gerald could assign him more networking torture. 3 years. 3 years since Rachel walked out. Since he became a single father overnight. Since his entire life shrank down to one priority: keeping Sophie safe, fed, and happy. Everything else was just survival. The gala was survival. His mid-level position at Patterson and Klein required occasional appearances at these corporate nightmares, smiling at people who looked through him like he was furniture. He'd learned the trick early. Find a corner, look busy, leave the second it was acceptable. But tonight, something was different. He saw her across the room, and even through 200 bodies and enough collective wealth to buy a small country, Vivian Sterling was impossible to miss. Not because of the midnight blue gown that probably cost more than his car, not because every third conversation seemed to orbit her name, but because while everyone else performed their carefully rehearsed social dances, she stood perfectly still beside a marble column, holding a champagne glass like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Ryan knew that posture. He'd worn it himself for months after Rachel left. That particular blend of exhaustion and desperation, hidden behind just enough composure that most people never noticed. Most people weren't looking. He was. That's Vivian Sterling, someone said nearby, a junior associate whose name Ryan could never remember. Sterling Enterprises, Forbes 400, 30 years old and worth more than everyone in this room combined. Ball or Marsitza? I heard her father's furious she won't get married, another voice chimed in. All that money and power, but apparently she's failing at the only job that matters, finding a husband. They laughed. Ryan didn't. He watched Vivian take another drink, watched her smile at someone who approached with business cards and ambition. But her eyes were wrong, too bright, too glassy. And when the older man in the expensive suit touched her elbow, steering her toward a quieter section of the ballroom, something cold settled in Ryan's chest. He recognized that move too, the isolation tactic. Separate the target, lower their defenses, make your pitch when they're vulnerable. None of his business. He should find Gerald, make his appearance count, go home to Sophie and Mrs. Chen, who was probably asleep on his couch by now. Instead, Ryan found himself moving through the crowd. The man had cornered Vivian near the North Terrace entrance, talking too close, one hand still on her arm. Ryan couldn't hear the conversation, but he could read Vivian's body language. The slight sway, the unfocused eyes, the way she kept blinking like she was trying to clear fog. "Excuse me." Ryan stepped into their space with all the confidence he didn't feel. "Ms. Sterling, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but there's an urgent call from Tokyo. They said it couldn't wait." The older man turned, irritation flashing across his face. Up close, Ryan recognized him. Marcus Hendricks, CEO of Hendricks Financial Group, the kind of investor who smiled while he destroyed companies. "Who the hell are you?" Hendricks didn't move his hand from Vivian's arm. "Ryan Carter, Patterson, and Klein. We're handling the Sterling Enterprises merger documentation." The lie came surprisingly easy. "The Tokyo office needs Ms. Sterling's approval on the regulatory filings. Time sensitive." Vivian blinked at him. For a moment, Ryan thought she'd call him out, tell Hendricks he was lying, get him fired and possibly arrested. But something shifted behind those exhausted eyes. A flash of recognition, not of him, but of the escape route he'd just offered. Of course! Her voice was steadier than Ryan expected. Marcus, we'll continue this conversation next week. My office will call yours. Hendricks' smile never reached his eyes. Vivian, I really think we should finalize next week. Steel beneath the polite words. Ryan offered his arm, and after a heartbeat's hesitation, Vivian took it. They walked toward the terrace, leaving Hendricks standing there with his predatory smile finally cracking. The moment they stepped outside into the October cold, Vivian released his arm and leaned against the stone railing, breathing like she'd just surfaced from deep water. There's no call from Tokyo, is there? No. Patterson and Klein doesn't handle my merger documentation. No. So you just committed corporate fraud to rescue someone you've never met? Ryan shrugged. Technically, I just lied. Not sure that qualifies as fraud. Vivian laughed, sharp and unexpected, nothing like the polished sound he'd heard inside. You have no idea who that was, do you? Marcus Hendricks, hostile takeovers, reputation for targeting vulnerable companies, and asset stripping them. Ryan met her eyes. And you were vulnerable, exhausted, probably hadn't eaten all day, definitely had too much champagne on an empty stomach, and he knew exactly what he was doing. The laughter died. Vivian studied him with an intensity that made Ryan want to step back, like she was seeing something she hadn't expected to find. Why? Why what? Why risk your job? Because that's what you did. If Hendricks complains to my father, if word gets back to your firm that you interfered in a private business conversation, you're finished. So why? Wait. Ryan thought about Sophie, about the night he'd found her crying in her room after another kid asked why her mommy didn't love her anymore, about the hollow look in her 6-year-old eyes that no child should ever wear. Because someone should have stepped in, he said quietly, and nobody else was paying attention. Vivian's perfectly maintained composure cracked, just for a second, just long enough for Ryan to see the exhaustion, the loneliness, the weight of being Vivian Sterling, billionaire empire builder, and apparently completely alone. I need to get back inside, she said. People will notice. You need to go home, drink water, eat something, sleep. I can't. My father's inside, and if I leave early... She stopped. You don't understand. Ryan thought about his tiny apartment, about Sophie's crayon drawings covering the fridge, about the mountain of responsibilities waiting for him. He understood perfectly. You're right, he said. I don't. But I know what drowning looks like, and you're drowning in there. Vivian stared at him for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone, sent a rapid text, and pocketed it again. My car will be here in 3 minutes. I'll tell my father I'm handling a business emergency. Is that true? No. But apparently tonight is for lying. She almost smiled. Thank you, Ryan Carter from Patterson and Klein. You might have just saved my life. I doubt that. Then you don't know my world. She started toward the doors, then paused. And Ryan? Hendricks will remember you. He's the type who never forgets when someone makes him look foolish. Great. I'll make sure he doesn't destroy your career. Consider it payment for the rescue. Before Ryan could respond, she was gone, disappearing back into the gala with the same perfect posture she'd worn all evening, like the last 10 minutes had never happened. Ryan stood on the terrace alone, Chicago's skyline glittering before him, and wondered what the hell he'd just done. The consequences arrived faster than expected. Monday morning, Gerald called Ryan into his office before he'd even finished his coffee. Marcus Hendricks called me personally this weekend. Gerald's voice was ice. Apparently you interfered in a private business conversation with Vivian Sterling at Friday's gala. Want to explain that? Ryan's stomach dropped. So much for Vivian protecting his career. I thought she needed assistance. You thought? You're a junior analyst, Carter. You don't think. You don't interfere with billionaires and their business partners. You certainly don't lie about phone calls from Tokyo. I don't care what she looked like. Hendricks wants you fired. He suggested you were drunk, inappropriate, possibly trying to leverage a connection with Sterling Enterprises for personal gain. The words hit like punches. Ryan forced himself to stay calm, to not think about Sophie, about rent, about the precarious foundation of their entire life. That's not what happened. Then what did happen? Ryan met Gerald's eyes. I saw someone in trouble. I helped. That's it. Gerald leaned back in his chair, studying Ryan with an expression that might have been disgust or admiration, or both. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both. Hendricks wants blood, but Gerald pulled out his phone, scrolled through emails. Sterling Enterprises sent a letter this morning. Personal recommendation from Vivian Sterling herself. Apparently, you demonstrated exceptional judgment and professional discretion during a complex business situation. She's requesting that Patterson and Klein assign you to assist with their upcoming merger documentation. Permanently. Ryan's brain stuttered. What? It's a 7-figure contract, Carter. The kind of account that makes partners very, very happy. Gerald's smile was predatory. So congratulations. You just became the most valuable junior analyst in this firm. Don't screw it up. Book. The email arrived that afternoon from v.sterling@sterlingenterprises.com to rcarter@pattersonklein.com. Subject, thank you. Mr. Carter, I don't make a habit of needing rescue, and I especially don't make a habit of thanking people who provide it, but Friday night was an exception on both counts. I've ensured that Marcus Hendricks will not pursue any action against you. I've also provided your firm with enough incentive to view your interference as valuable initiative rather than terminable offense. Consider us even. However, and I'm aware this is highly irregular, I would appreciate the opportunity to thank you properly. Dinner, this week, my choice of venue. No business discussions, no networking. Just two people having a conversation. If you're interested, my assistant will coordinate details. Vivian Sterling. Ryan read the email 3 times. Sophie was already asleep when he got home that night, curled up with the stuffed elephant Rachel had given her before disappearing. Mrs. Chen was watching a Korean drama with subtitles, and Ryan's apartment looked exactly like what it was. A single father's survival space, held together with exhaustion and determination. He opened his laptop and stared at the email. This was insane. Vivian Sterling didn't have dinner with junior analysts. She didn't send personal emails to men she'd met once. And she definitely didn't use phrases like, just two people having a conversation, unless she wanted something. Ryan had spent 3 years learning to recognize danger, learning to protect Sophie from anything that could disrupt their fragile stability. And Vivian Sterling, beautiful, powerful, damaged, was danger wearing a designer gown. He should decline, politely, professionally. Instead, he hit reply. Miss Sterling, dinner works, but I picked the venue and I'm paying. You rescued my career. Least I can do is buy you a meal. Ryan. Her response came in under 2 minutes. Deal. Thursday, 7 p.m. Surprise me. Ryan took Vivian Sterling to Jimmy's diner. It was possibly the worst decision he'd ever made. The look on her face when the car pulled up to the grease-stained windows and flickering neon sign was worth documenting. She stepped out wearing a dress that probably cost more than Jimmy's entire property value, and for a moment Ryan wondered if he'd just committed social suicide. This is your choice? She stared at the diner like it might be contagious. You said surprise you. I'm guessing nobody's ever taken you for a $3 burger. There's a reason for that, but she followed him inside anyway. Jimmy's was exactly what it looked like, a Southside institution that hadn't changed since 1987, complete with cracked vinyl booths, a jukebox that only played Motown, and coffee that could strip paint. The dinner rush was in full swing, and every head turned when Vivian walked in. Ryan! Jimmy himself appeared from the kitchen, grinning. Twice in 1 week? Sophie feeling better? Much better. Thanks for the soup, by the way. She loved it. Jimmy's eyes slid to Vivian, widened slightly, then returned to Ryan with a look of pure confusion. Your usual booth? Please. They slid into the corner booth, the one with duct tape holding the seat together, and a view of the entire restaurant. Vivian looked around like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. "You come here often?" "Every Sunday. Sophie loves the milkshakes." Ryan handed her a laminated menu that had definitely seen better days. "And before you ask, yes, everything is terrible for you. No, they don't have a gluten-free option, and the coffee will either cure you or kill you." Vivian studied the menu, then looked up with an expression Ryan couldn't quite read. "You brought me here on purpose." "Yeah. Why?" "Because you spend every day in boardrooms and penthouses and places where everyone wants something from you. I figured maybe you'd like one meal where nobody cares who you are." Vivian set down the menu. "Everyone here knows who I am. I can feel them staring. They're staring because you're wearing a dress that costs more than their cars and sitting in Jimmy's diner. Give it 5 minutes. They'll get bored." Boops. Sure enough, the attention drifted away as people returned to their meals, their conversations, their normal Thursday nights. The jukebox played Marvin Gaye. Someone laughed at the counter. And Vivian Sterling, Billionaire CEO, sat in a cracked vinyl booth looking completely lost. "I don't know what to order." "Cheeseburger, fries, chocolate shake, trust me." When their food arrived, greasy, perfect, completely unpretentious, Vivian stared at her plate like it was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "When's the last time you ate something that wasn't prepared by a private chef or served at a business dinner?" Ryan asked. "I honestly don't remember." "Then start with the fries. They're mandatory." Vivian picked up a fry, examined it suspiciously, then took a bite. Her expression shifted, surprise, then something that might have been pleasure. "Oh my God. Right? This is amazing, terrible, both? Both. Definitely, both." She ate another fry. "Why do I suddenly feel like I've been missing out on something important?" Ryan smiled. "Because you have been. Welcome to normal life." They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Around them, Jimmy's continued its usual chaos. Crying babies, first dates, old couples who'd been coming here for 40 years. The kind of messy, imperfect humanity that existed completely outside Vivian's world. "Tell me about Sophie," Vivian said finally. The request caught Ryan off guard. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. You mentioned her at the gala, said someone should have stepped in. You were talking about her, weren't you? About her mother?" Ryan set down his burger. He didn't talk about Rachel. Not with strangers. Not with anyone except Mrs. Chen, and even then, only when necessary. But something about Vivian's expression, the genuine curiosity, the absence of judgment, made him answer. "Rachel left 3 years ago. Sophie was 3. Came home from work one day and found a note on the kitchen table. Said she couldn't do it anymore. The marriage, motherhood, any of it. Said she felt like she was drowning and needed to save herself before it was too late." Vivian didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty platitudes. Divorce papers arrived 2 weeks later. Full custody to me, no contest. She signed away every right, every responsibility. Sophie asks about her sometimes, and I don't know what to say. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that her mother chose to leave? "You can't." "No, you can't. So I just keep showing up. Keep making breakfast and packing lunches and reading bedtime stories. Keep being the parent who stayed." Vivian traced patterns in the condensation on her milkshake glass. "My mother died when I was 8. Car accident. My father never remarried, never talked about her. Just threw himself into building the business and expected me to do the same. Sterling Enterprises became our family. Success became our language. And somewhere along the way, I forgot what else was supposed to matter." "What else does matter?" "I have no idea. That's the problem." She met his eyes. "I spent the last 20 years building an empire, proving I could be just as ruthless and brilliant as any man. And now I'm 30 years old, worth billions, and I can't remember the last time I did something just because it made me happy." Hence the champagne and the exhaustion at the gala. Hence the complete breakdown that you witnessed. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "My father thinks I'm wasting my life. Says I should step back from the company, find a suitable husband, start producing heirs to carry on the Sterling legacy. Every family dinner is the same conversation. Why am I still unmarried? Why am I prioritizing business over my biological clock? Why can't I just be normal? Ryan thought about Gerald's office, about Marcus Hendricks, about the thousand small ways the world tried to make people fit into boxes they'd never chosen. Screw normal, he said. Normal is overrated. Vivian laughed. Real this time, unguarded. Said the man eating a $3 cheeseburger in a diner. Exactly. This is way better than normal. This is perfect. This is chaos. Like I said, perfect. They stayed until Jimmy started giving them looks, until Vivian had finished her entire burger and declared it both the worst and best meal she'd ever eaten. Ryan paid $17, including tip, and ignored Vivian's protests. Outside, her driver waited by the black Mercedes, patient and invisible. The October night was cold enough to see breath, and Vivian wrapped her arms around herself despite the expensive coat. Thank you, she said. For this. For Friday night. For treating me like a human being instead of a business opportunity. You are a human being. Most people forget that. Ryan wanted to say something profound, something that would somehow fix the sadness he saw in her eyes. But he was just a single father who worked too much and worried constantly. And Vivian Sterling's problems were so far outside his experience that any advice would be meaningless. So instead he said, "Same time next week?" Vivian's surprise was genuine. "You want to do this again?" "Unless you've had enough of terrible diner food and normal people." "I haven't." "But Ryan, people will talk. If we're seen together, if anyone finds out that Vivian Sterling is having secret dinners with a junior analyst, then we won't get seen. I know a pizza place that delivers. My apartment is small and messy and full of 6-year-old chaos, but it's private." The offer hung in the cold air between them. Ryan immediately regretted it. What was he thinking, inviting a billionaire to his crappy apartment? But Vivian's expression shifted into something soft, something vulnerable. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "Very much." Their secret started simply. Thursday nights became their time. Vivian would arrive after Sophie was asleep, wearing jeans and sweaters instead of designer gowns, and they'd eat pizza on Ryan's worn-out couch while talking about everything and nothing. She told him about the board meetings where men twice her age questioned every decision. He told her about Sophie's latest school project, a family tree that broke his heart because half of it was empty. She described the exhaustion of maintaining perfection every second of every day. He explained the terror of raising a daughter alone, of knowing that one wrong choice could damage her forever. "Does it get easier?" Vivian asked one night, curled up on the opposite end of the couch. "The constant fear that you're failing?" "No, but you stop expecting it to." Yet Ryan handed her another slice of pizza. "You just keep showing up and hoping that's enough." "What if it's not?" "Then you show up anyway." Vivian studied him in the dim lamplight. "You're different from anyone I've ever met. Because I'm broke and eat pizza for dinner? Because you don't want anything from me, say." Ryan thought about that. "I want you to stop looking so tired all the time. Does that count?" "No one's ever wanted that before." "Then you've been talking to the wrong people." She smiled. The real smile that Ryan had started recognizing. The one that had nothing to do with cameras or shareholders or maintaining the Sterling image. "My father's hosting a charity gala in 2 weeks," Vivian said. "The annual Sterling Foundation event. It's exhausting just thinking about it. All the same people, all the same conversations. Hours of performing while everyone judges whether I'm successfully upholding the family legacy." "Sounds terrible." "It is, but—" She hesitated. "What if you came with me?" Ryan nearly dropped his pizza. "What?" "As my guest. Not as my date. We'd keep everything professional. But you could be there, and maybe it would be less unbearable if I knew someone was actually seeing me instead of just Vivian Sterling." Disappointment to her father. "Vivian, I can't afford—" "I'll handle everything. Suit, ticket, transportation. Please, Ryan. I just need one person in that room who doesn't expect me to be perfect." "I am ban my chance." He should have said no. Should have recognized the danger of crossing further into Vivian's world, of exposing himself and potentially Sophie to the kind of attention that could destroy their quiet life. But Vivian was looking at him with desperate hope, and Ryan had never been good at saying no to people who needed him. "Okay," he said, "but I'm not wearing a bow tie." Deal. The Sterling Foundation Gala made the Langham event look like a casual cocktail party. Ryan stood in the borrowed tuxedo, perfectly tailored, probably worth more than his monthly salary, and tried not to think about how completely out of his depth he was. The venue was the Sterling family estate in Lake Forest, all old money and architectural grandeur, and the guest list read like a Fortune 500 directory. Vivian appeared at his elbow, stunning in silver, her public mask firmly in place. Ready? Absolutely not. Perfect. Neither am I. She took his arm. Just stay close and pretend you belong here. Everyone else is pretending too. They entered together, and Ryan immediately felt the attention shift. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Who was the unknown man beside Vivian Sterling? Business associate? Potential suitor? The speculation was almost physical. Ignore them, Vivian murmured. They'll create a story regardless of the truth. What followed was 3 hours of social performance art. Vivian introduced Ryan to senators, CEOs, philanthropists, and socialites, all while maintaining perfect composure. She smiled at the right moments, laughed at unfunny jokes, and navigated conversations with practiced grace. But Ryan saw the cracks. The way her smile never quite reached her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the exhaustion that deepened with every interaction. And then her father approached. William Sterling was everything Ryan expected. Tall, commanding, with the kind of presence that demanded attention. He looked at Ryan the way someone might examine an unfamiliar insect. Father, this is Ryan Carter from Patterson and Klein. He's assisting with the merger documentation. Carter. William didn't offer his hand. Vivian speaks highly of your analytical skills. Thank you, sir. Vivian also tells me you're a single father, raising a daughter alone. The words were polite, but the subtext was clear. You're beneath us, beneath her, beneath this entire world. Yes, sir. Admirable. Difficult, I imagine. William turned to Vivian. Darling, Senator Morrison is asking for you. Something about the education initiative. Of course. Vivian touched Ryan's arm, brief, apologetic. I'll be right back. She disappeared into the crowd, leaving Ryan alone with William Sterling. My daughter has been distracted lately, William said conversationally. Less focused on business, more interested in personal matters. I hope that's not related to your, friendship. Ryan kept his expression neutral. Vivian is the most focused person I know. She's also stubborn, idealistic, and prone to emotional decisions that could damage everything I've built. The Sterling legacy isn't a game, Mr. Carter. It requires sacrifice, discipline, a willingness to put the family empire above personal desires. With respect, sir, Vivian has sacrificed plenty. She's built Sterling Enterprises into... She's built nothing. She's managed what I created. There's a difference. William's smile was cold. And now she's reaching an age where the board expects certain things. A stable marriage, an heir, a demonstration that the Sterling name will continue through the next generation. Whatever this is, he gestured vaguely at Ryan. It's a distraction we can't afford. Before Ryan could respond, someone called William away. Ryan stood alone in the middle of the gala, surrounded by wealth and power, and finally understood the prison Vivian lived in. He found her on the terrace, the same terrace where they'd first talked, where Vivian had thanked him for seeing her as human. Your father just threatened me. Vivian didn't turn around. What did he say? That you're distracted, that I'm a liability, that the Sterling legacy requires you to sacrifice everything personal for the empire. He's not wrong. Vivian, he's not wrong, Ryan. This is my life. Board expectations, family pressure, the constant performance. I was raised for this, trained for this. And the sad truth is that no matter how successful I become, it will never be enough because I'm failing at the one job that actually matters to him, being a proper Sterling woman. Ryan moved beside her, leaning against the railing. Below, the estate grounds stretched out like something from a movie, perfect and cold and utterly lifeless. What do you want? He asked quietly. What? Not what your father wants, not what the board expects. What do you want, Vivian? She was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know anymore. I spent so long trying to prove I could run the company, be as ruthless and brilliant as any man, that I forgot to figure out what else mattered. And now I'm 30 years old, worth billions, and I can't remember the last time I made a choice that was mine instead of what someone else expected. So make one now. It's not that simple. It is. Now. It's terrifying and complicated and probably stupid, but it's simple. What do you want right now, in this moment? Vivian turned to face him, and Ryan saw tears threatening behind her carefully maintained composure. I want to go to your apartment. I want to eat pizza and watch stupid movies and pretend for one night that I'm not Vivian Sterling. I want to meet Sophie and hear about her day and feel what it's like to be part of something real instead of this, she gestured at the gala, this beautiful, empty performance that I'm so tired of giving. Ryan pulled out his phone. Then let's go. I can't just leave. My father will what? Be disappointed? He already is, so screw it. Let's go. Vivian stared at him like he'd suggested something impossible. Then, slowly, a smile broke across her face. Genuine, reckless, free. Okay. They left through the service entrance, avoiding the main crowd, and Ryan called a Uber while Vivian texted her driver to cover for her absence. The ride back to the city felt like an escape, like two prisoners breaking free from different cells. I've never done this before, Vivian said, watching Chicago's skyline approach. Ditched a gala? Made a choice just for me. Sophie was still awake when they arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Chen, working on a drawing that involved excessive amounts of glitter. Daddy! She launched herself at Ryan with the kind of full-body enthusiasm only 6-year-olds possess. Then she noticed Vivian and stopped, suddenly shy. Sophie, this is my friend Vivian. Vivian, this is Sophie, the artist currently destroying our kitchen table with glitter sheet. It's a unicorn, Sophie explained seriously. Mrs. Chen says unicorns need lots of sparkles. Mrs. Chen is absolutely right, Vivian said, crouching down to Sophie's level. That's the most sparkly unicorn I've ever seen. Sophie studied Vivian with the kind of intense scrutiny only children can manage. Then, you're really pretty. Are you a princess? Vivian laughed, surprised and delighted. No, sweetheart, I'm definitely not a princess. Oh, okay. Do you like pancakes? The question was so random, so perfectly Sophie, that Ryan had to fight back a smile. I've never really had them, Vivian admitted. Sophie's eyes went wide with horror. Never? Daddy, she's never had pancakes. That's so sad. It is tragic, Ryan agreed. Maybe we should fix that. Yes. 20 minutes later, after Mrs. Chen had gone home, and Sophie had been convinced to save the rest of her glitter project for tomorrow, the three of them sat around Ryan's tiny kitchen table eating slightly burnt pancakes at 11 p.m. Vivian Sterling, Billionaire CEO, Forbes 400. Disappointment to her father, sat in her borrowed jeans and sweater, eating pancakes with the 6-year-old who peppered her with questions about everything from favorite colors to whether she'd ever seen a real unicorn. And for the first time in years, Vivian looked happy. These are amazing, she said, syrup dripping down her chin. They're burnt, Ryan pointed out. They're perfect. Sophie nodded seriously. Daddy always burns them a little, but that's okay because burnt pancakes taste better anyway. Clearly, I've been doing pancakes wrong my entire life. Don't worry, Sophie said with the confidence of a child who knew important truths. We can teach you. Later, after Sophie had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from excitement and too much sugar, Ryan and Vivian sat on the living room couch surrounded by crayon drawings and stuffed animals and all the beautiful chaos of a real home. Thank you, Vivian said quietly. For what? For this. For showing me what I've been missing. She looked around the small apartment, so different from her penthouse, so full of life. I don't want to go back to the gala, to any of it. The empire, the expectations, the constant performance. I don't want to be Vivian Sterling anymore. Ryan turned to face her. Then who do you want to be? I don't know, but I want to find out. They sat in comfortable silence, the city quiet beyond the windows, and something fundamental shifted between them. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't announced. But when Vivian finally left near dawn, when she kissed his cheek and promised to call tomorrow, Ryan knew that nothing would ever be simple again. And watching her car disappear down the street, he realized he didn't care. The calls started 3 days later. Ryan's phone buzzed at 11:30 p.m. while he was reviewing quarterly reports in bed, and Vivian's name appeared on the screen like a question he hadn't expected to answer. "Can't sleep?" he said instead of hello. "I'm standing in my kitchen trying to make pancakes." Her voice carried a mix of frustration and amusement. "I have a private chef, a fully stocked gourmet kitchen, and apparently zero ability to do this without burning everything." Ryan smiled into the darkness. "How bad are we talking?" "The smoke alarm went off twice. My security team thinks there's a fire." "Did you use butter?" "I use cooking spray. Very expensive cooking spray." "That's your first mistake. Butter, medium heat, and patience. Sophie's rule is that the first pancake always sucks, so don't judge yourself by that one." "The first 3 pancakes sucked. Then you're making progress." Vivian laughed, and Ryan could hear her moving around, the faint sound of a spatula scraping against a pan. "I called my father today. Told him I needed space from the company for a while. He didn't take it well." Ryan sat up straighter. "How bad?" "He threatened to remove me from the board. Said I was having some kind of breakdown and needed psychiatric evaluation. Suggested that my recent erratic behavior was proof I wasn't fit to run Sterling Enterprises." "Vivian." "I hung up on him. For the first time in my life, I hung up on William Sterling mid-lecture." She paused. It felt amazing and terrifying in equal measure. Ryan didn't know what to say. His relationship with Rachel had ended with a note on the kitchen table, not boardroom politics and family empires. His biggest conflict was convincing Sophie to wear matching socks. "Are you okay?" he asked finally. "No, yes, I don't know." A longer pause. "Can I see you tomorrow, so?" "I have Sophie until 6. Mrs. Chen's visiting her sister. Can I come over?" "I'll bring lunch. Real lunch, not gourmet nonsense. Maybe Sophie can show me her glitter unicorn collection." Ryan thought about his apartment, about the mess and the chaos, and the complete lack of anything resembling Vivian's normal world. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." The next day, Vivian arrived at noon carrying bags from a deli Ryan recognized from 3 blocks over. She'd traded designer clothes for jeans and a Northwestern sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and Sophie stared at her like she'd discovered something fascinating. "You look different," Sophie announced, "less sparkly." Is that good or bad? Sophie considered this with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice. "Good. Sparkly is only for special days. Today is Saturday." Sophie's philosophy on life, Ryan explained. Sparkles are earned, not worn casually. They ate sandwiches at the kitchen table while Sophie described her week in exhaustive detail. How Emma brought a hamster for show and tell. How Mrs. Patterson said her reading was getting really good. How the boy who'd been mean about her mommy leaving got in trouble for pushing someone on the playground. Vivian listened to every word, asked questions, and didn't check her phone once. After lunch, Sophie dragged Vivian to her room to see the unicorn collection, and Ryan stood in the doorway watching Vivian sit cross-legged on the floor, while his daughter explained the intricate mythology she'd created for each stuffed animal. "This one is Princess Sparkle. She's the leader because she's the oldest and has the most glitter. And this one is Moonbeam. She's shy, but really brave when it matters. And this one, is that Pancake?" Vivian pointed to a unicorn with syrup-colored fur. Sophie's face lit up. "Yes, I named her after you came over. Because pancakes are the best food and she's the best unicorn." Ryan watched Vivian's expression shift. Surprise, then something softer, almost vulnerable. Like she'd just been given something precious and didn't quite know how to hold it. "That's the best name I've ever heard," Vivian said quietly. Later, after Sophie had been convinced to do her homework, a battle Ryan fought every weekend, Vivian helped him fold laundry in the living room. It was possibly the most domestic thing Ryan had ever done with another adult, and the absurdity wasn't lost on him. "Does the press know you're spending your Saturday folding a 6-year-old's pajamas?" Boris. "The press thinks I'm at a spa in Arizona recovering from stress." Vivian matched 2 of Sophie's socks, both covered in cartoon cats. "My assistant is very good at creating alibis." "You're hiding." "I'm surviving." She set down the socks and looked at him. "My father called the board, emergency meeting Monday morning. They're voting on whether to remove me as CEO. Ryan stopped folding. Can they do that? If they decide I'm mentally unfit? Yes. And my father has been very carefully building that narrative. The sudden absence from the office, the rejection of suitable marriage prospects, the friendship with, she gestured at Ryan, inappropriate connections. I'm an inappropriate connection? You're a junior analyst with a 6-year-old daughter and no family money. In my father's world, that's basically a character flaw. Your father's world sounds exhausting. Ichiwa, Bamashis. It is, but it's also the only world I've ever known. Vivian picked up another pair of socks, mismatched, one with dinosaurs and one with planets. What happens if I lose the company, Ryan? It's not just about money or power. Sterling Enterprises is my entire identity. Without it, who am I? Ryan thought about the night Rachel left, about staring at that note and wondering the same thing. Without his marriage, without the life he'd planned, who was he? You're the woman who learned to make pancakes at 30, he said, who spent Saturday morning listening to a 6-year-old explain unicorn politics, who folded laundry and didn't check her phone and actually seemed happy. That's who you are without the company. Vivian's eyes were bright with tears she refused to let fall. What if that's not enough? It's more than enough. Sophie appeared in the doorway, homework abandoned. Can Vivian stay for dinner? We're having spaghetti. Daddy always makes too much. Ryan looked at Vivian. She looked back. Ryan. And something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the line they were crossing, the risk they were taking. I'd love to stay for dinner, Vivian said. The weekend became a pattern. Vivian would arrive Saturday mornings with groceries or books or craft supplies Sophie had mentioned wanting. They'd cook together. Badly, usually, but with increasing competence. She'd help Sophie with homework, play elaborate games involving unicorns and dragons, and fold herself into their small life with surprising ease. And every night, after Sophie fell asleep, Ryan and Vivian would sit on the couch and talk about things that mattered. The pressure of her father's expectations. His fear that he was failing Sophie by not providing a complete family. Her growing realization that she'd spent years building something she'd never actually wanted. I thought success would feel different, Vivian said one night, curled up against the armrest with a mug of tea. I thought if I just worked hard enough, proved myself completely, that I'd finally feel satisfied. But it never came. Just more pressure, more expectations, more proof that nothing I did would ever be enough. Because you were chasing someone else's definition of success. What's yours? Ryan looked around the apartment, at Sophie's drawings covering the fridge, at the stack of library books they'd read together, at the comfortable mess of a life built from love instead of ambition. This, right here, Sophie happy and healthy, bills paid, some version of peace at the end of the day. That's it. That's success. It sounds so simple. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. Vivian set down her tea and moved closer, and Ryan felt the shift, the moment when friendship started becoming something else, something more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. I need to tell you something, she said quietly, and I need you to be honest with me about whether it changes things. Ryan's heart kicked against his ribs. Okay, I'm falling for you, for this life you've built, for the way Sophie looks at the world, for the fact that you see me as human instead of an empire. And I know that's completely unfair because you have Sophie to think about. And I'm a disaster who can't even keep her own company. And getting involved with me would be... Ryan kissed her. It wasn't planned, wasn't smooth. He just leaned forward and kissed her because words felt inadequate, and because he'd been wanting to for weeks, and because Vivian Sterling looked terrified and hopeful in equal measure. She kissed him back, and for a moment, nothing else existed. Not the company or the board meeting or William Sterling's disappointment. Just two broken people finding something whole in each other. When they finally pulled apart, Vivian's expression was stunned. That was ashish. A mistake? Ryan offered. Perfect. Terrifying. Probably both. Both is becoming our theme, so... Ryan, I need you to understand what you're getting into. If this becomes public, if anyone finds out about us, the media will destroy you. They'll dig into your life, Sophie's life, every choice you've ever made. And my father, He'll see you as a threat and eliminate you without hesitation. I'm a junior analyst. How threatening can I be? You're the thing that makes me question everything I've built. That's the most threatening thing in William Sterling's world. Ryan took her hand, small and cold despite the warm apartment. Then we keep it private. We're careful. We protect Sophie first, always. But Vivian, I'm tired of playing it safe and ending up alone, and I think you are too. Vivian squeezed his hand. Monday's board meeting will determine everything. If they remove me as CEO, if my father wins, then none of this matters, because I'll have nothing left to protect. You'll have this. You'll have us. Will I? The question was raw, vulnerable. Because in my experience, people don't stick around when things get hard. They leave. They save themselves. Shit. Ryan thought about Rachel's note, about the empty side of the bed, about 3 years of proving to himself and Sophie that he wouldn't leave no matter how hard it got. I'm not people, he said, and I don't run. The kiss this time was slower, deeper, weighted with promises neither of them knew if they could keep. Sunday evening, Vivian left for the first time looking reluctant. Sophie had already said goodnight, and Ryan walked Vivian to the door with the awareness that tomorrow might change everything. Whatever happens at that meeting, he said, you're stronger than they think, stronger than your father believes, and if they can't see that, they don't deserve you. Vivian leaned against the doorframe. I've spent my entire life trying to earn my father's approval, trying to prove I was worth the Sterling name. And now I'm about to lose it all because I finally figured out that his approval was never worth having. Then you've already won. It doesn't feel like winning. It will, eventually. What? She kissed him goodnight, soft and sad and full of uncertainty, and disappeared into the elevator. Ryan stood in his doorway long after she'd gone, wondering what the hell he'd just committed to and whether he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Monday arrived like a storm. Ryan was in his office reviewing contracts when his phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. They voted, I'm out. 3 words. The end of an empire. Ryan stared at the message, trying to process what it meant. Vivian Sterling, the woman who'd built a billion-dollar company, who commanded boardrooms and negotiated deals that made headlines, had just been removed from her own life. He called immediately. She didn't answer. He tried again. Nothing. At lunch, Gerald appeared at Ryan's desk looking grim. Conference room. Now. Ryan followed him, dread settling like concrete in his stomach. The entire senior partnership was waiting. Gerald closed the door and turned to face Ryan with an expression that might have been pity or contempt, or both. William Sterling called me this morning, Gerald said. Apparently his daughter has been spending quite a bit of time with you. Weekends, late nights, very cozy. Ryan kept his face neutral. We're friends. Oh? Friends. Gerald's laugh was cold. William Sterling doesn't care about friendship. He cares that his recently removed daughter has formed an attachment to a junior analyst that makes her current instability look like a romantic crisis rather than a mental health issue. That's not... He's offered Patterson and Klein a very lucrative contract, exclusive representation for all Sterling family legal matters. 7 figures annually, in exchange for one very small concession. Ryan's hands clenched. Let me guess. You're reassigned, effective immediately. No contact with Vivian Sterling. No phone calls, no visits, no accidental meetings. You disappear from her life completely, or the contract disappears and you're terminated for inappropriate conduct with a client. The room went silent. Ryan looked around at the senior partners, men who'd built careers on compromise, on knowing when to sacrifice principle for profit. And if I refuse? Then you're unemployed by 5 p.m., blacklisted from every major firm in Chicago, and William Sterling makes it his personal mission to destroy any future legal career you might attempt to build. Gerald leaned forward. Ryan, be smart. This woman is going through a breakdown. She's lost her company, alienated her father, and latched onto you as some kind of life raft. That's not love. That's desperation. And when she recovers, when she goes back to her real life, you'll be the embarrassing mistake she pretends never happened. Ryan thought about Vivian folding laundry, about her learning to make pancakes, about the way she listened to Sophie's unicorn stories like they were the most important thing in the world. She's not going back, what? he said quietly. Everyone goes back. Money always wins. Not this time. Gerald's expression hardened. Then you're fired. Pack your desk. Security will escort you out. Ryan stood up and for the first time in 3 years felt something like freedom. Tell William Sterling that his daughter is worth more than his contracts. And tell yourselves that when you're cashing those checks, remember you sold out a decent person for money. He walked out of the conference room with his head high, past the junior associates who pretended not to stare, and started packing the desk he'd occupied for 5 years. His phone buzzed. Vivian, finally calling back. Ryan, I'm so sorry. My father told me what he did, threatening your job, trying to force you away. You have to take the deal. You can't lose everything because of me. Too late. I'm already fired. Silence. Then, what? I told them no. Told them you were worth more than their contracts. They terminated me on the spot. Ryan, oh my God, I never wanted. You have Sophie. You have bills. You can't. I can. And I did. Where are you? My apartment. I've been drinking expensive wine and feeling sorry for myself while my father systematically destroys my life. I'm coming over. Ryan, this is insane. You just lost your job because of me. You should be furious. I'm furious at your father. I'm furious at my former bosses. But I'm not furious at you. So give me your address and let me in when I get there. 20 minutes later, Ryan stood in front of the most expensive building he'd ever seen, getting judged by a doorman who clearly knew he didn't belong. But Vivian had called down, and reluctantly, the doorman let him pass. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt like ascending into another dimension. When the doors opened directly into Vivian's apartment, Ryan stepped into a space that looked like something from an architecture magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, furniture that probably cost more than his car, art that might have been original Picasso's. And in the middle of all that carefully curated perfection, Vivian sat on the floor in sweatpants and a t-shirt, surrounded by empty wine bottles and papers that looked like legal documents. Welcome to the aftermath, she said, gesturing at the chaos. Sterling Enterprises officially belongs to my father as of 3 p.m. today. The board voted unanimously to reinstate him as CEO and remove me completely. I'm allowed to keep my shares but have zero operational control. I'm officially irrelevant. Ryan sat down beside her, ignoring the probably priceless rug. You're not irrelevant. I'm a 30-year-old billionaire who just got fired from her own company because she couldn't figure out how to be both successful and human. My father was right. I was never strong enough for this. Your father is wrong about everything that matters. Vivian laughed, bitter and exhausted. He destroyed your career, Ryan, called your bosses and threatened them until they had no choice but to fire you. And for what? Because I had the audacity to spend time with someone who actually saw me as a person? Because I dared to want something other than the life he designed? He's scared. Of what? I'm powerless now. I lost, so he's scared because you're finally free. Because without the company holding you hostage, you might actually choose happiness over his approval. And that terrifies him because it proves that everything he sacrificed, his wife, his daughter's childhood, any chance at real connection, was for nothing. Vivian stared at him. You lost your job defending me and you're still trying to make me feel better? I'm not trying. I'm succeeding. Look at your face. You almost smiled. You're insane. Probably. But I'm also right. Ryan picked up one of the legal documents. What are these? Severance terms, gag orders. My father's lawyers being very thorough about ensuring I can't damage the Sterling reputation. I sign these, I get to keep my money and my meaningless board seat. I refuse, and he'll tie me up in litigation for the next decade. Are you going to sign? Vivian took the papers from him and stared at them like they were written in a foreign language. I don't know. Part of me wants to fight, to prove that he can't just erase me from the company I built. But another part, the part that's been exhausted for years, just wants to walk away, to finally admit that I never wanted this life in the first place. Then walk away. It's not that simple. Sterling Enterprises is my identity. Without it, I'm just... She stopped, tears finally spilling over. I'm just a rich woman with no purpose and no idea who she actually is. Ryan pulled her close, and Vivian collapsed against him like she'd been holding herself together with pure stubbornness and had finally run out. "You're the woman who makes Sophie laugh," he said quietly, "who learned to fold laundry and burn pancakes, who asked about unicorn names and stayed for spaghetti dinners. That's who you are, and it's enough." What if it's not? What if I wake up in 6 months and realize I made a terrible mistake? That I gave up everything that mattered for what? Say it. For you, for us, for this fantasy that somehow a billionaire and a single father can build something real. Ryan tilted her face up, forcing her to meet his eyes. It's not a fantasy. It's messy and complicated and probably doomed, but it's real. More real than anything in your old life. And yeah, maybe you'll regret it. Maybe you'll wake up and realize you missed the power and the board meetings and your father's approval. But at least you'll have lived something honest instead of performing something perfect. Vivian kissed him, desperate and raw, tasting like wine and tears and 3 decades of wanting something she'd never been allowed to name. When they finally broke apart, she was smiling through the tears. "I got you fired. I noticed. I destroyed my company. Debatable. You freed yourself from something that was killing you. My father thinks I'm having a breakdown. Your father thinks anything he can't control is a breakdown." Vivian laughed. Real this time, unguarded. "What happens now?" "Now you sign those papers, take your money, and figure out who Vivian Sterling actually is when nobody's watching. And I find a new job, preferably one where the bosses don't take bribes from vindictive billionaires. And we see if this thing between us can survive in the real world. You make it sound simple. It's not, but we're good at complicated." They sat on the expensive rug surrounded by legal documents and empty wine bottles, and for the first time since the board meeting, Vivian looked like she could breathe. "I want to meet Sophie properly," she said. "Not as your friend who visits on weekends, as whatever this is, whatever we're becoming." Ryan's chest tightened. "That's a big step." "I know, and if you're not ready, if you need to protect her from this mess, I understand. But Ryan, I'm in this. Completely. And that means being honest with the most important person in your life. She already loves you. She named a unicorn after you. I meant it has to be honest about us, about what we are to each other." Ryan thought about Sophie's questions, the ones she'd stopped asking about her mother, the careful way she watched him for signs of sadness. She was 6, but she understood more than she should about love and loss and the spaces people left behind. "Okay," he said. "Tomorrow, family dinner, all 3 of us, and we tell her the truth." Vivian's smile was tremulous and hopeful. "What is the truth?" "That I'm falling in love with you, that you're falling in love with me, that we're going to try this and see what happens, and that no matter what, we're going to be honest with each other and with her." "You're falling in love with me?" "Have been since you ate that first terrible diner burger and declared it perfect." Vivian kissed him again, softer this time, weighted with something that felt like promise. "I'm terrified." "Good, me too. Let's be terrified together." They spent the rest of the evening on Vivian's couch, so different from Ryan's worn-out furniture, but somehow just as comfortable, planning what came next. Vivian would sign the severance papers, officially severing ties with Sterling Enterprises. Ryan would start job hunting, leveraging contacts outside his father's influence. And tomorrow, they'd sit down with Sophie and start building something real. When Ryan finally left near midnight, Vivian walked him to the elevator with her fingers laced through his. "Thank you," she said, "for being stupid enough to throw away your career for me. Best decision I ever made. You're definitely insane. Probably. But I'm your kind of insane." The elevator doors opened and Ryan stepped inside, watching Vivian smile until the doors closed between them. On the ride down, he checked his phone and found 3 missed calls from Mrs. Chen and 1 very worried text. "Sophie asking about you. Everything okay?" Ryan smiled and texted back. "Everything's complicated. Be home soon." And Mrs. Chen? "Tomorrow might get interesting." Her response was immediate. About time. Sophie was waiting at the kitchen table when Ryan got home, still in her pajamas despite it being nearly 1 in the morning. Mrs. Chen sat beside her, looking equal parts exhausted and amused. You said you'd be home by bedtime, Sophie said, accusation clear in her voice. Ryan sat down across from her, guilt settling heavy in his chest. You're right. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Something important came up. With Vivian? Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Yes, with Vivian. Sophie studied him with those two wise eyes that always made Ryan feel like she could see straight through every lie he'd ever told. Is she your girlfriend now? The question landed like a punch. Ryan glanced at Mrs. Chen, who shrugged as if to say, You're on your own with this one. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about tomorrow. Vivian's coming for dinner, and we need to have a conversation, all three of us, about her being your girlfriend? What is he about what that means and how you feel about it? Because, Sophie, you're the most important person in my life, and nothing changes that, ever. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, picking at a loose thread on her pajama sleeve. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. Is she going to leave like Mommy did? The question broke something in Ryan's chest. He moved around the table and pulled Sophie into his lap, holding her tight. I don't know what's going to happen, he said honestly. I can't promise that things won't change or that people won't leave, but I can promise that I will always be here. Always. And Vivian, she cares about you very much. She's not trying to replace anyone. She just wants to be part of our lives. Do you love her? Ryan thought about lying, about protecting Sophie from complications she was too young to understand. But she'd already lived through enough lies when Rachel left. I think I'm starting to, yeah. Does she love you? I think so, but we're still figuring it out. Sophie was quiet again, and Ryan could feel her processing, trying to make sense of adult emotions that didn't have easy answers. Pancake likes her, Sophie said finally. The unicorn. And unicorns are very good at knowing who's nice and who's not. But Ryan smiled against her hair. That's a pretty solid endorsement. Can we make spaghetti tomorrow, the kind with the meatballs? Absolutely. And can Vivian help? Because last time she tried to help cook, she burned the garlic bread, and it was really funny. I'm sure she'd love to burn more garlic bread. Sophie climbed out of his lap and headed toward her room, then paused in the doorway. Daddy, I'm glad you're not sad anymore. You were sad for a really long time after Mommy left. But when Vivian's here, you smile more. She disappeared before Ryan could respond, leaving him sitting at the kitchen table with tears burning behind his eyes. Mrs. Chen stood up, gathering her things. That child is wiser than all of us combined. She shouldn't have to be. No, but she is. And she's handling this better than you're giving her credit for. Mrs. Chen paused at the door. That woman makes you happy, Ryan. Don't sabotage it because you're scared. Sophie needs to see that sometimes taking risks leads to good things. After Mrs. Chen left, Ryan sat alone in the quiet apartment, thinking about risks and happiness, and all the ways love could either save you or destroy you. His phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. Can't sleep. Keep thinking about tomorrow. What if Sophie hates this? What if I say the wrong thing? Ryan smiled and typed back. She already knows. Asked me if you were my girlfriend at 1 a.m. I told her the truth. What did she say? That her unicorn likes you, which is apparently the highest possible recommendation. I'm going to cry. That's the sweetest thing I've ever heard. Don't cry yet. Save it for when you burn the garlic bread tomorrow. You're never letting me live that down, are you? Never. Good. See you at 6. And Ryan, thank you for being brave enough to tell her the truth. Thank you for being worth the truth. Ryan fell asleep on the couch, still holding his phone. And when he woke up 6 hours later, Sophie was already awake and making a list of questions for Vivian written in purple crayon. The day passed in a blur of nervous energy. Ryan cleaned the apartment 3 times, changed his shirt twice, and burned his own batch of garlic bread while testing the recipe. Sophie rearranged her unicorn collection 4 different ways before deciding on a semicircle formation that she declared official and welcoming. At 5:30, Ryan's phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Carter, this is Elizabeth Hendricks from the Chicago Tribune. I'm working on a story about Vivian Sterling's recent departure from Sterling Enterprises, and sources indicate you may have played a role in her decision. Would you care to comment? Ryan's stomach dropped. No comment. We have confirmation that you were fired from Patterson and Klein yesterday following intervention from William Sterling. We also have photographs of you entering Ms. Sterling's residence last night and leaving after midnight. The public has a right to know if this relationship influenced her corporate decisions. This conversation is over. Mr. Carter, the story runs tomorrow with or without your input. If you'd like to provide context. Ryan hung up and immediately called Vivian. She answered on the first ring. The press found out. How did you know? Because 3 different reporters have called me in the last hour. My father leaked it. He's positioning me as unstable and you as the opportunist who took advantage. The story breaks tomorrow morning, and it's going to be ugly. Ryan looked at Sophie. Etienne, Ryan, who was sitting on the floor adding glitter to a welcome sign she'd made. We need to cancel tonight. If reporters show up here, if Sophie gets photographed, no. Vivian's voice was firm. We're not canceling, we're not hiding, and we're definitely not letting my father control our lives because he's afraid of looking bad. Vivian, this affects Sophie. If her face ends up in the papers, if kids at school start asking questions, then we prepare her. We're honest. We do exactly what we planned, but we do it knowing that tomorrow might bring consequences. Ryan, I've spent my entire life making decisions based on what other people would think. I'm done. Are you? Ryan watched Sophie add more glitter, completely unaware that her small world was about to collide with something much bigger and more dangerous. No, he said finally. I'm not done. Come over. We'll deal with whatever happens. I'm already in the car. 20 minutes later, Vivian arrived carrying bags of groceries and wearing the kind of determined expression that Ryan had learned meant she'd made a decision and wouldn't be talked out of it. Sophie launched herself at Vivian the moment she walked through the door. I made you a sign with glitter. Vivian knelt down to examine the poster board covered in purple glitter and crayon drawings of unicorns. This is the most beautiful sign I've ever received. Can I keep it? Years set dates. Yes. I made it special for tonight because Daddy said we're having an important conversation. We are. A very important one. Vivian looked up at Ryan and he saw the fear beneath her brave face. But first, I heard someone needs help burning garlic bread? Sophie giggled. You're really bad at cooking. The worst! Your dad's been making fun of me for weeks. They moved to the kitchen, and Ryan watched Vivian and Sophie work together, measuring ingredients, mixing sauce, and yes, burning the garlic bread exactly as predicted. The normalcy of it felt surreal given what was coming tomorrow, but Ryan forced himself to stay present, to appreciate this moment before everything got complicated. Dinner was chaotic in the best way. Sophie told elaborate stories about school. Vivian asked questions that showed she'd been paying attention to every detail, and Ryan sat back watching 2 of the most important people in his life connect in ways that felt both terrifying and right. After the dishes were cleared and Sophie had been convinced to save the ice cream for after the conversation, they moved to the living room. Vivian sat on the couch looking more nervous than Ryan had ever seen her, and Sophie settled between them with Pancake the unicorn clutched in her arms. Sophie, Ryan started. You know how you asked if Vivian was my girlfriend? Uh-huh. Well, she is, and we wanted to talk to you about what that means. Sophie looked at Vivian, then back at Ryan. Does it mean she's going to live here? No, she has her own apartment, but it means she'll be around more, that she's important to both of us, and that we want you to feel comfortable with that. Do you love her? The directness of 6-year-olds never failed to catch Ryan off guard. Vivian's eyes went wide, and Ryan took a breath before answering. Yes, I do. Sophie turned to Vivian. Do you love Daddy? Vivian's composure cracked, emotions flooding her face. Yes, sweetheart, I do. Very much. And do you love me? The question was so small, so vulnerable, that Ryan felt his throat close up. Vivian reached out and took Sophie's hand. I think you're one of the most amazing people I've ever met, Vivian said softly. You're smart and funny, and you taught me about unicorns and pancakes and all these things I never knew I was missing. So yes, Sophie, I love you too. Sophie was quiet, processing. Then, is this going to be like with Mommy? Are you going to leave? Ryan watched Vivian struggle with the question, watched her try to find words that would be both honest and reassuring. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes, Vivian said finally, and I can't promise that everything will always be perfect. But I can promise that I'm here because I want to be. Not because I have to be, but because being with you and your dad makes me happier than anything else in my life. Does that make sense? Sophie nodded slowly. Mommy left because she didn't want to be a mom anymore. She told Daddy in a letter. I wasn't supposed to know, but I heard him tell Mrs. Chen. Ryan's chest tightened. He'd tried so hard to protect Sophie from that truth, but of course she'd heard. Children always heard more than adults wanted them to. Your mommy made a choice that hurt a lot of people, Vivian said. But that was about her, not about you. You are wonderful and lovable, and anyone who doesn't see that is missing out on something incredible. That's what Daddy says. Because your daddy is very smart. Sophie hugged Pancake tighter. Can I ask you something? Anything. If you and Daddy get married someday, will you be my mom? The question hung in the air like something fragile and dangerous. Ryan started to intervene, to tell Sophie it was too soon for that conversation, but Vivian spoke first. I could never replace your mom, she said carefully. But if that ever happened, I would love to be someone you could count on. Someone who shows up and stays and loves you no matter what. Not a replacement, just someone who's there. Sophie considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice, then nodded. Okay, but you have to promise to get better at cooking, because Daddy's garlic bread is way better than yours. The tension broke. Vivian laughed, tears sliding down her cheeks. Deal. I promise to take cooking lessons. And you have to learn all the unicorn names. There are 17 now. I'll make flashcards. And you have to come to my school play next month. I'm a treat. I wouldn't miss it for anything. Sophie seemed satisfied with these terms. She climbed off the couch, declared she was ready for ice cream now, and headed to the kitchen like she hadn't just negotiated the terms of their entire future. Ryan and Vivian sat in stunned silence. That went better than expected, Ryan said finally. She asked if we were getting married. She's 6. She thinks in absolutes. She also asked if I'd be her mom. Vivian's voice cracked. Ryan, I don't know how to be a mother. I can barely take care of myself. You're doing fine. I burned garlic bread and cried during a conversation about unicorns. That's not fine. That's human. Sophie doesn't need perfect. She just needs present. But Vivian leaned against him and Ryan wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Tomorrow the story would break. Tomorrow their private relationship would become public scandal. Tomorrow William Sterling would probably escalate his campaign to destroy both of them. But tonight, Sophie was eating ice cream in the kitchen, and Vivian was crying happy tears on his couch. And Ryan Carter, unemployed single father with no plan and too many complications, felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. They ate ice cream together, all 3 of them, and Sophie insisted on showing Vivian her entire room, including the closet organization system she'd invented for her stuffed animals. Vivian took notes, like this was the most important information she'd ever received. At 8:30, Sophie started yawning, and Ryan initiated the bedtime routine. Vivian hung back uncertainly until Sophie grabbed her hand. You have to help with the story. Daddy always does the voices wrong. So Vivian ended up sitting on Sophie's bed, reading about a dragon who was afraid of flying, doing voices that made Sophie giggle uncontrollably. Ryan stood in the doorway watching, and the image burned itself into his memory. Vivian Sterling, former CEO, billionaire, most powerful woman in Chicago, sitting on a 6-year-old's bed covered in unicorn sheets, making ridiculous dragon voices. After Sophie finally fell asleep, they retreated to the living room. Vivian collapsed on the couch, looking emotionally wrung out. That was the most terrifying thing I've ever done. You've negotiated billion-dollar deals. This was scarier. What if I'd said the wrong thing? What if she'd hated me? She asked when we're getting married. I think you're safe. Vivian groaned. We've been together less than a week, and your daughter is already planning our wedding. She's efficient. She's going to be devastated when this all falls apart. Ryan sat beside her, taking her hand. Why do you assume it's going to fall apart? Because everything in my life falls apart. My relationship with my father, my company, every friendship I've ever attempted. I don't know how to make things last, Ryan. Maybe that's because you were building on foundations that were never solid. Your father's approval was never going to be enough because he didn't want a daughter. He wanted a legacy. The company was never going to fulfill you because it was his dream, not yours. And your friendships failed because they were transactions, not real connections. And this? What foundation are we building on? Ryan thought about it, about all the reasons this was insane and doomed and completely irrational. Honesty, terrible cooking, unicorn knowledge, the fact that we both know what it's like to lose everything and keep going anyway. That's not exactly a fairy tale. No, but it's real, and real beats perfect every time. Vivian's phone buzzed. She checked it, and her expression went dark. The Tribune published early. Online edition went live 10 minutes ago. She turned the screen so Ryan could see the headline. Sterling Empire Crumbles. Billionaire Heiress Chooses Mystery Man Over Family Business. The article was brutal. It painted Vivian as unstable, Ryan as opportunistic, and their relationship as the catalyst for Sterling Enterprises' leadership change. There were photos. Ryan leaving her building at midnight, the two of them at dinner weeks ago, even a grainy shot of Vivian entering his apartment building. "They've been following us for weeks," Vivian said quietly. "My father hired investigators, built a case, and now he's using it to destroy any credibility I have left." Ryan scrolled through the article, his anger building with every paragraph. They dug into his past, into Rachel's abandonment, into his finances. They'd found everything and twisted it into a narrative of a struggling single father who'd targeted a vulnerable billionaire. This is character assassination. "This is my father's specialty. He's making sure that even if I wanted to fight for the company, the board would never take me seriously. And he's making sure you're painted as the villain so that when we inevitably fall apart, I'll come crawling back, grateful for forgiveness. We're not falling apart." Ryan, your face is on the internet being called a gold digger. Your daughter's school will see this. Mrs. Chen will see this. Everyone in your life will assume the worst. Let them. You can't mean that. Ryan stood up, pacing the small living room. Your father thinks he can control everything by controlling the narrative. He thinks if he makes this ugly enough, painful enough, that we'll just give up. But he's wrong. Because the one thing he doesn't understand is that some people don't run when things get hard. You should run. You should take Sophie and distance yourself from this mess before it destroys you both. Is that what you want? No, but it's what you should do. Ryan stopped pacing and looked at her, really looked at her. Vivian was terrified, he realized. Not of her father or the press or losing the company. She was terrified of being happy, of having something real, because every time she'd reached for happiness before, it had been taken away. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "The press can write whatever they want. Your father can threaten and manipulate and try to destroy us. And yeah, tomorrow is going to suck. Sophie might get asked questions at school. I'll probably get more job rejections because of this. But none of that changes the fact that I love you, and I'm not running." Vivian's tears finally spilled over. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe. But I'd regret walking away more." Wow. She stood up and kissed him, desperate and grateful and still terrified. When they broke apart, she was shaking. "I need to make a statement," she said. "A real one. Not some corporate non-answer, but the truth. About why I left the company. About us. About all of it. Vivian, that'll make it worse. It'll make it honest. And I'm done hiding." She pulled out her phone and started typing. "I'm going to post on social media. My father can control the Tribune, but he can't control my own voice." Ryan watched her compose the message, deleting and rewriting, trying to find words that would convey everything she needed to say. Finally, she showed him the screen. "Statement regarding my departure from Sterling Enterprises. I stepped away because I spent 30 years building an empire I never wanted. I prioritized my father's approval over my own happiness. And I finally realized that no amount of success would ever be enough. Yes, I'm in a relationship. Yes, it influenced my decision. Because for the first time in my life, I found someone who saw me as a human being instead of a business asset. Ryan Carter is not opportunistic or manipulative. He's a single father who showed me what real strength looks like. Showing up every day for someone you love, regardless of whether it's glamorous or profitable. To everyone calling this a scandal, It's not. It's me finally choosing to live instead of just perform. And to my father, I hope someday you understand that your approval was never worth the price you demanded. Oshi I basi bonmatsa. Ryan read it twice. That's going to blow up. I know. Your father will lose his mind. I hope so. You sure about this? Vivian looked at him. And for the first time since the board meeting, she looked certain. I've never been more sure of anything. She hit post. The response was immediate and explosive. Within minutes, her statement had hundreds of shares, thousands of comments, and every media outlet in Chicago was scrambling to respond. Vivian's phone started ringing. Reporters, former colleagues, friends she hadn't spoken to in years. She ignored all of it and turned off her phone. What now? Ryan asked. Now we wait for the fallout, and tomorrow we deal with whatever consequences come. They stayed up until nearly 3 a.m., talking about everything and nothing, avoiding the reality of what morning would bring. Eventually, exhaustion won, and Vivian fell asleep on Ryan's couch wrapped in a blanket that Sophie had insisted she take. Ryan covered her with another blanket, checked on Sophie, still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm, and finally let himself acknowledge the fear he'd been suppressing all night. This was going to get worse before it got better. William Sterling wouldn't take Vivian's statement lying down. The press would dig deeper, and somewhere in all of this, Sophie would get hurt. But looking at Vivian asleep on his couch, at the peaceful expression she wore for the first time in weeks, Ryan couldn't bring himself to regret any of it. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Mr. Carter, this is William Sterling. We should talk, privately, before this situation becomes irreparable. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer if you walk away from my daughter and allow her to recover from this episode with some dignity and tact. Name your price. Ryan stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back a single word. No. The response came immediately. You're making a mistake. I will destroy you. You can try. Ryan blocked the number and set down his phone. Outside, Chicago was dark and quiet, the city sleeping through the scandal that would dominate tomorrow's news cycle. Inside, in his small apartment, Vivian Sterling slept on his worn-out couch, while his daughter dreamed of unicorns and dragons. And Ryan Carter, unemployed, broke, facing down one of the most powerful men in Chicago, felt something he hadn't felt in years. Ready. Morning arrived with all the subtlety of a building collapse. Ryan woke to 17 missed calls, 43 texts, and 6 voicemails from numbers he didn't recognize. The story had gone national overnight. Every major news outlet was covering the Sterling scandal, and social media was divided between supporting Vivian's honesty and condemning her as an irresponsible heiress who'd thrown away her family's legacy for a man. Vivian was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop, reading through the responses to her statement. Good morning, she said without looking up. We're trending on Twitter. Apparently we're either a beautiful love story or the most pathetic celebrity scandal of the year. The internet can't decide. What do you think? I think I don't care what the internet thinks anymore. She closed the laptop. Sophie awake? Not yet. Give her another 20 minutes. Ryan, I need to warn you about something. My father called my lawyer this morning. He's threatening to sue you for, and I quote, emotional manipulation and financial exploitation of a mentally vulnerable woman. It's complete garbage, and it'll never hold up in court, but it'll be expensive and public and designed to make your life hell. Ryan poured coffee, his hands steady despite the anger building in his chest. Let him try. You need a lawyer, a good one. I can... No, you're not paying for my legal defense. That plays right into his narrative. Then how? I'll figure it out. I always do. Sophie appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She took one look at both of them and frowned. Why do you both look worried? Ryan and Vivian exchanged glances. They'd agreed last night to be honest with Sophie, but explaining this felt impossible. Remember how we talked about Vivian and me being together? Ryan said carefully. Uh-huh. Well, some people wrote stories about it, and the stories aren't very nice, so today might be a little weird, and if anyone asks you questions at school, you don't have to answer them, okay? Sophie's frown deepened. What kind of questions? About Vivian, about our family. But it's private, and you get to decide what you want to share. Are people being mean to you?
Some people, yeah.
Sophie walked over to Vivian and climbed into her lap with the easy trust of a child who'd already decided someone was safe. Don't be sad.
Mean people are just jealous because you're pretty and nice and you're learning to cook better.
Vivian's laugh was half sob. She wrapped her arms around Sophie and held on like she was drowning.
You're absolutely right, Vivian said. Mean people are just jealous. And Daddy always says that jealous people have small hearts.
Your daddy is very wise. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Ryan looked through the peephole and saw Mrs. Chen standing in the hallway holding a newspaper. He opened the door, and she walked in without preamble, slapping the Tribune on the kitchen table. Well, you two made quite the impression. Sophie looked at the front page. A photo of Vivian and Ryan at dinner, the headline screaming scandal. That's you guys, you're in the newspaper. We are, Ryan said, trying to figure out how to explain this without terrifying her. Mrs. Chen sat down at the table. Sophie, sweetheart, go get dressed for school. Your daddy and I need to talk to Vivian. After Sophie left, Mrs. Chen looked at both of them with an expression that was equal parts concern and approval. I've been with this family for 3 years, she said. Watched Ryan barely survive those first months after his wife left. Watched him build a life for Sophie out of nothing but stubbornness and love. And in 3 years, I've never seen him happy. Not really, until you. She pointed at Vivian. Mrs. Chen. I'm not finished. The press can write whatever they want. William Sterling can threaten and manipulate. But that little girl in there is happier than she's been in years because her father is finally living instead of just surviving. So whatever you two are doing, keep doing it. And ignore everyone who can't see that sometimes the best things in life don't make sense on paper. Vivian wiped at her eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you successfully make garlic bread without setting off the smoke alarm. The moment of lightness was brief. Ryan's phone rang. Gerald from Patterson and Klein. Don't answer it, Vivian said. But Ryan answered anyway, putting it on speaker. Ryan, I'm calling to offer you your job back. Full reinstatement, promotion to senior analyst, and a salary increase. All you need to do is issue a statement distancing yourself from Vivian Sterling and confirming that your relationship was brief and has ended. Ryan looked at Vivian, who was staring at the phone like it was a snake. No, Ryan said. Excuse me? I said no. You fired me for refusing to abandon someone I care about. You don't get to buy me back because the optics changed. Ryan, be reasonable. William Sterling is threatening to pull all his contracts if we don't, then lose the contracts. Goodbye, Gerald. He hung up, and the silence in the kitchen was deafening. You just turned down a promotion, Vivian said. Yeah, and a salary increase. Yep, you're insane. We've established that. I'll say, Mrs. Chen stood up. I'm taking Sophie to school. You two figure out what you're doing, and when you know, call me. But whatever you decide, make sure it's because you want it, not because you're scared. After she left with Sophie, Ryan and Vivian sat in the quiet apartment, the newspaper between them announcing their scandal to the entire city. I have a trust fund, Vivian said suddenly, separate from the company, separate from my father's control. It's enough to live on for the rest of my life without ever working again. I could give you money, pay off your debt, cover Sophie's education, make sure you're protected. No. Ryan, your pride isn't worth, it's not about pride. It's about us being equals. You're not my patron, and I'm not your charity case. We figure this out together, or we don't figure it out at all. Vivian stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the street where photographers were probably already gathering. I don't know how to do this. Be normal. Build something that isn't about money or power or corporate strategy. I don't have a blueprint for any of this. Ryan joined her at the window. Neither do I. I'm unemployed with a 6-year-old and no plan. We're both disasters. So what do? We start with today, with right now. What do you want to do right now? Vivian thought about it, really thought about it. Then she smiled, small but genuine. I want to go ice skating. What? You told me once that you take Sophie ice skating at Millennium Park. I've never done that. Never just went to do something fun without it being a networking opportunity or a photo op. So let's go ice skating. Let's be normal people on a Tuesday morning while the city loses its mind over our scandal. Ryan laughed. You're serious? Completely. Unless you're too scared to be seen in public with the most scandalous woman in Chicago. I'm terrified. Let's go. They went ice skating in Millennium Park while the internet debated their relationship, and William Sterling plotted his next move. They fell down repeatedly, laughed until they couldn't breathe, and ate hot dogs from a street vendor while sitting on a bench watching other people live their normal lives. And for 3 hours, surrounded by strangers who either didn't recognize them or didn't care, Ryan and Vivian were just two people falling in love despite every reason they shouldn't. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. But it was real. And that, Ryan decided, was enough. The photographers found them by the hot dog stand. Ryan saw the cameras first, 3 men with professional equipment, moving through the crowd with predatory focus. He grabbed Vivian's hand instinctively, but she didn't run. Let them take pictures, she said, squeezing his fingers. I'm done hiding. Yeah. But so they sat there eating hot dogs while flashes went off, while people started recognizing them and pulling out phones, while their quiet moment became tomorrow's headline. Vivian didn't flinch. She just finished her hot dog, wiped mustard from the corner of her mouth, and smiled at Ryan like they were the only 2 people in the park. This is going to make everything worse, Ryan said. Probably, but I got to eat a $3 hot dog with you while ice skaters fell down in the background. That's worth a few dozen terrible headlines. They walked back through the city holding hands, and Ryan felt the weight of every stare, every whispered conversation, every phone camera pointed in their direction. This was what Vivian's life had always been: constant observation, constant judgment, never a single moment of genuine privacy. How did you survive this for 30 years? He asked. I didn't. I just performed survival and hoped nobody noticed the difference. Back at Ryan's apartment, they found Mrs. Chen waiting with Sophie and an expression that meant trouble. The school called, Mrs. Chen said before they'd even gotten through the door. 3 different parents complained that their children were distracted by questions about Sophie's family situation. The principal wants to meet with you tomorrow morning. Yet, Sophie sat at the kitchen table looking small and confused, her backpack still on. I didn't do anything wrong, she said quietly. Emma asked if Vivian was my new mom, and I said she's Daddy's girlfriend. Then everyone started asking questions, and Mrs. Patterson said we needed to focus on math instead. Ryan knelt in front of her. You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. Sometimes adults make things complicated when they should be simple. Am I in trouble? No. Never. This is not your fault. But Sophie's eyes were already too knowing, already understanding that her small world had been invaded by something bigger and meaner than 6-year-olds could navigate. After Mrs. Chen left and Sophie was distracted with her homework, Ryan found Vivian standing in the kitchen staring at her phone with an expression he'd never seen before, pure rage. What happened? Towas EBC. She turned the phone so he could see. William Sterling had released a statement to the press. It is with deep concern that I watch my daughter's continued decline. Vivian has always been emotionally fragile, and her recent decisions, abandoning the company, pursuing inappropriate relationships, making erratic public statements, demonstrate a clear mental health crisis. As her father, I'm exploring options for intervention, including psychiatric evaluation and potential conservatorship. I only want what's best for my daughter, even if she's currently unable to see that herself. Ryan read it twice, his anger building with each word. He's trying to have you declared incompetent. He's trying to take away my legal autonomy. If he succeeds with a conservatorship, I lose control of my money, my decisions, my entire life. He becomes my legal guardian, and I become a child in the eyes of the law. Can he actually do that? If he finds the right doctors, presents the right evidence, convinces a judge that I'm a danger to myself? Yes. It's difficult, but with enough money and the right legal team, anything's possible. Vivian set down her phone with shaking hands. He's not just trying to destroy my reputation anymore. He's trying to erase me completely. Ryan pulled her close, feeling her trembling against him. We fight back. We get you a lawyer, we document everything, we prove you're completely competent, With what evidence? I quit my job, alienated my entire social circle, and started a relationship with someone the press is calling my breakdown rebound. On paper, I look exactly like what my father is claiming. Then we change the paper. We show them who you really are. Who am I really? The question was raw, desperate. Because I'm starting to think I have no idea. Before Ryan could answer, Sophie appeared in the doorway holding Pancake the unicorn. Are you okay? She asked Vivian. You look sad. Vivian wiped her eyes quickly, forcing a smile. I'm okay, sweetheart. Just having a hard day. Sophie walked over and pressed Pancake into Vivian's hands. Pancake always makes me feel better when I'm sad. You can borrow her tonight. The simple kindness broke something in Vivian. She pulled Sophie into a fierce hug, and Ryan watched them, his daughter and the woman he loved, and felt his resolve harden into something unbreakable. William Sterling wanted to erase Vivian's autonomy? Fine. They'd show him exactly who he was dealing with. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Ryan made a decision. I'm calling a press conference, he said. Vivian looked up from the couch where she'd been sitting in silence for the past hour. What? Your father controls the narrative because we keep reacting instead of acting. So we're going to act. Tomorrow morning, we hold a press conference. We tell our story, the real one. Not the sanitized corporate version or the tabloid scandal. The truth. Ryan, that's insane. The media will tear us apart. They're already tearing us apart. At least this way we control what they're tearing apart. He sat beside her. Look, I've spent 3 years being invisible, keeping my head down, avoiding attention, trying to protect Sophie by staying small. But small doesn't work anymore. Your father is betting that we'll be too scared to fight back publicly. Let's prove him wrong. What would we even say? The truth. That you are not having a breakdown, you're having a breakthrough. That you spent 30 years trying to earn approval from someone who was never going to give it, and you finally chose yourself instead. That I'm not some opportunist. I'm a single father who fell in love with an incredible woman who happened to be a billionaire. And that Sophie is happy and safe and surrounded by love, regardless of what the internet thinks. Vivian stared at him. You realize this could backfire spectacularly. Yeah, but doing nothing definitely will. So let's be spectacular. She almost smiled. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met. I learned from the best. They spent the next 3 hours planning. Vivian reached out to a former colleague who worked in crisis PR, someone she trusted who owed her no loyalty to William Sterling. Ryan drafted talking points, trying to find words that would convey the truth without sounding defensive or desperate. By 2 a.m., they had a plan. By 3 a.m., they'd sent out press releases announcing the conference for noon the next day. And by 4 a.m., they'd both realized they'd just committed to the most terrifying thing either of them had ever done. What if I freeze? Vivian asked, lying on Ryan's couch staring at the ceiling. What if I get up there and can't find the words? Then I'll find them for you. What if they ask about Sophie? About whether this relationship is appropriate given your responsibilities as a father? Then I'll tell them that Sophie is thriving, that she's never seen me this happy, and that teaching her to choose love over fear is the best parenting I can do. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple. It's terrifying, but we're doing it anyway. Morning arrived too fast. Ryan woke Sophie gently and explained that today was going to be different, that he and Vivian were going to talk to some reporters, that it might be on TV, and that no matter what anyone said, she was safe and loved. Are you going to tell them about the unicorns? Sophie asked seriously. Should I? Probably not. Unicorns are private. Good advice. Mrs. Chen arrived early to take Sophie to school, and before she left, Sophie hugged both Ryan and Vivian with the fierce intensity of a child who understood more than she should. Be brave, she whispered to Vivian, like Princess Sparkle. Who's Princess Sparkle? The leader unicorn. She's brave even when she's scared. After they left, Ryan and Vivian got ready in silence. She'd brought a suit, professional but not intimidating, the kind of outfit that said competent adult rather than corporate overlord. Ryan wore his one good suit, the same one he'd worn to the gala where this had all started. Ready? He asked. Absolutely not. Let's go. The press conference was held at a small hotel conference room downtown. Ryan had expected maybe a dozen reporters. Instead, they walked into a room packed with cameras, journalists, and enough recording equipment to broadcast to the entire city. Vivian's hand tightened on his. For a moment, Ryan thought she might bolt. But then she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked to the podium with the same confidence she'd probably worn into 1,000 board meetings. The room went silent. "Thank you for coming," Vivian said, her voice steady despite the tremor Ryan could hear underneath. "I know there's been a lot of speculation about my recent decisions, so I wanted to address them directly." She paused, took a breath, and launched into the statement they'd prepared. 3 weeks ago, I walked away from Sterling Enterprises. The press called it a breakdown. My father called it a mental health crisis. But the truth is simpler and harder than either of those explanations. I walked away because I was drowning in a life I'd never actually chosen. The reporters were scribbling notes, cameras recording every word. I spent 30 years trying to earn my father's approval. I built a billion-dollar company, negotiated deals that made headlines, worked 80-hour weeks, and sacrificed everything personal for professional success. And it was never enough. Because what my father wanted wasn't a successful daughter, he wanted a compliant one. Someone who would follow his plan, marry the right person, produce the right heirs, and never question whether any of it was making her happy. Ryan watched journalists exchange glances. This wasn't the corporate statement they'd expected. 2 months ago, I met Ryan Carter at a business gala. He didn't know who I was, didn't care about my net worth or my company or my connections. He just saw that I was exhausted and vulnerable, and he helped me without expecting anything in return. That simple act of human decency changed everything. She looked at Ryan, and despite the cameras and the crowd, her smile was genuine. Ryan showed me what life could be when it wasn't a performance. He introduced me to his daughter Sophie, who taught me more about authenticity in 5 minutes than I'd learned in 30 years of business school. And slowly, I realized that I'd been so busy building an empire that I'd forgotten to build a life. A reporter raised her hand. "Ms. Sterling, your father claims you're mentally unstable. How do you respond?" Vivian didn't hesitate. "My father claims I'm unstable because I made choices he doesn't agree with. But choosing happiness over his approval isn't mental illness. It's sanity. The real breakdown would have been staying in a life that was killing me slowly while pretending everything was fine." "What about allegations that Mr. Carter is exploiting you financially?" Ryan stepped forward before Vivian could answer. "I'm unemployed. My apartment costs $800 a month. Vivian has never given me money, never offered to pay my bills, and I've never asked. What we have isn't a transaction, it's a relationship. The fact that people can't understand that says more about them than about us. Mr. Carter, how do you respond to concerns that this relationship is inappropriate given your responsibilities as a single father?" "My daughter is thriving. She's happy, healthy, doing well in school, and surrounded by people who love her. Vivian has been nothing but kind and supportive. Sophie's actual mother abandoned her 3 years ago, but nobody questions that. The only thing people seem to find inappropriate is that I fell in love with someone successful. If Vivian were a struggling artist or a teacher, nobody would care. The problem isn't our relationship. It's your assumption that successful women and normal men can't possibly be equals." The room erupted with questions, but Vivian raised her hand for silence. "I want to address one more thing. My father is threatening to seek conservatorship over me, claiming I'm unable to make my own decisions. Let me be absolutely clear. I am in complete control of my mental faculties. I have never been suicidal, never been a danger to myself or others, and every choice I've made has been deliberate and informed. The only thing I'm guilty of is disappointing a man who confused control with love." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked with emotion. "I spent my entire life trying to be the daughter William Sterling wanted, and it was never going to be enough because what he wanted was impossible. Someone who would give up her autonomy, her identity, her chance at happiness, all to maintain an image that served his ego. I'm done performing for him. I'm done performing for anyone. This is me, flawed, uncertain, learning to cook without burning everything, falling in love with a man who drives a 12-year-old Honda and makes terrible jokes. And if that's a scandal, then the world needs better scandals." The room exploded with questions, but Vivian just shook her head. "That's all I have to say. Thank you." She walked off the podium with Ryan beside her, and they made it exactly 15 feet before a reporter blocked their path, Elizabeth Hendricks from the Tribune. Ms. Sterling, one more question. Do you have any regrets about leaving Sterling Enterprises? Vivian stopped, considered, then answered with complete honesty. My only regret is that it took me 30 years to figure out that my father's version of success was making me miserable. Everything else, meeting Ryan, learning to make pancakes, spending Saturday mornings with a 6-year-old who taught me about unicorn politics. Those aren't regrets. Those are the first real choices I've made in my entire life. They pushed through to the exit and Ryan could hear the chaos behind them. Reporters arguing, phones ringing, the sound of a story that would dominate every news cycle for the next week. Outside, Vivian finally let herself shake. That was insane, Ryan finished. Completely insane. Did I really just publicly declare war on my father in front of 50 journalists? You really did. I think I'm going to be sick. Ryan pulled her into an alley away from the cameras and let her lean against the brick wall while she caught her breath. Her hands were trembling, her face pale, but her eyes were clearer than he'd seen them in weeks. You were incredible in there, he said. I was terrified. You were both. That's what made it incredible. Vivian's phone started buzzing. Calls, texts, notifications flooding in faster than she could read them. She glanced at the screen, then turned it off completely. Whatever happens next, I don't want to know about it for at least an hour. What do you want to do? Pick up Sophie from school, make terrible spaghetti, pretend the world isn't losing its mind over what we just did. So that's what they did. They picked up Sophie, who was full of questions about whether they'd been on TV and whether the reporters were nice. They made spaghetti, burning the garlic bread exactly as predicted, and they spent the evening playing elaborate games involving unicorns and dragons while Sophie narrated complex storylines that made absolutely no logical sense. It was normal and chaotic and perfect. But reality came crashing back at 8 p.m. when someone knocked on the door. Ryan looked through the peephole and saw a man in an expensive suit holding a briefcase. Can I help you? Mr. Carter, my name is David Chen. I'm an attorney representing William Sterling. I have documents that need to be served to Ms. Sterling regarding involuntary psychiatric evaluation. Ryan's blood went cold. He opened the door just enough to take the envelope, signed for it, and closed the door before the lawyer could say anything else. Vivian was standing in the living room, having heard everything. Sophie had been sent to her room to get ready for bed, and the apartment suddenly felt very small and very fragile. He's actually doing it, Vivian said quietly. He's trying to have me committed. Ryan opened the envelope and scanned the documents. Legal jargon filled the pages, but the intent was clear. William Sterling was petitioning for an emergency psychiatric hold based on Vivian's erratic behavior, impulsive decisions, and statements indicating disconnection from reality. This is garbage. No judge will approve this. You don't know my father's connections. He's probably already found a doctor willing to testify that my behavior meets the criteria. And after today's press conference, after I publicly declared that I'd rather make pancakes than run a billion-dollar company, it's not going to be hard to paint me as delusional. Ryan set down the papers. Then we fight. We get you a lawyer, we get your own psychiatric evaluation. We prove this is harassment. Ryan, that takes time. If he gets an emergency order, I could be held for 72 hours while they evaluate me. And if they decide I'm a threat to myself, they can extend it. I could lose weeks, months, fighting this from inside a psychiatric facility while my father seizes control of my assets. The reality hit Ryan like a physical blow. This wasn't just legal maneuvering, it was imprisonment dressed up as concern. What do we do? Vivian paced the small living room, her mind clearly working through scenarios. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but resigned. I disappear. What? If they can't find me, they can't serve me with the evaluation order. I leave Chicago tonight, go somewhere my father can't track me, and buy us time to build a legal defense. Vivian, running makes you look guilty. Staying makes me imprisoned. At least if I run, I'm making the choice myself. Ryan thought about Sophie in the next room, about the fragile stability they'd built, about everything that could go wrong with this plan. Where would you go? I have a friend, someone my father doesn't know about. She has a cabin in Michigan, completely off the grid. No paper trail, no digital footprint. I could stay there for a few weeks while my lawyer fights the petition. And what happens to us? The question hung in the air between them. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. I don't know, but Ryan, if I get committed, if my father succeeds with this, then there is no us. He'll make sure I never see you again. At least this way there's a chance. Sophie appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, Pancake the unicorn tucked under one arm. Why is everyone sad? Ryan and Vivian looked at each other, and Ryan saw his own heartbreak reflected in her face. Come here, sweetheart, Vivian said, pulling Sophie onto the couch. I need to tell you something. I have to go away for a little while. Sophie's face crumpled. No, you just got here. You can't leave. I don't want to. But sometimes grown-ups have to do hard things to keep the people they love safe. Is it because of the reporters? Because of the mean things people are saying? Sort of. But I promise, I will come back. As soon as I can, I will come back to you and your dad. That's what Mommy said. Sophie's voice was small and broken. She said she needed a break and she'd come back, but she never did. Vivian pulled Sophie close, crying openly now. I am not your mommy, and I am keeping my promise. Do you know why? Why? Because you taught me about unicorns, and unicorns always keep their promises. Sophie pulled back, studying Vivian's face with that too-knowing gaze. Princess Sparkle's rule? Exactly. Princess Sparkle's rule. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she held out Pancake the unicorn. You have to take her, so you remember to come back. Vivian took the stuffed animal with shaking hands. I can't take Pancake. She's your favorite. That's why you have to take her. So I know you're serious about coming back. Because nobody forgets Pancake. Ryan watched this exchange and felt his heart shatter. Sophie was 6 years old and already making peace with abandonment, already calculating the mathematics of promises and probability. After Sophie finally went to bed, after 3 extra stories and 17 reassurances that Vivian wasn't disappearing forever, Ryan helped Vivian pack a small bag. This is insane, he said for the 10th time. I know. Your father wins if you run. Well, he wins bigger if I stay and get locked in a psychiatric facility for 3 months while he convinces everyone I'm incompetent. What am I supposed to tell Sophie when she wakes up and you're gone? Vivian zipped the bag and turned to face him. Tell her the truth. That I love her, that I love you, and that I'm fighting to come back. That's all we have. The truth, and the promise that we're not giving up. I hate this. Me too. She kissed him, desperate and sad. But Ryan, listen to me. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow. She'll need a statement from you, character witnesses, anything that proves I'm competent and that this relationship is real and healthy. Can you do that? Of course. And if this goes badly, if my father wins and I lose, don't. If he wins, you need to protect Sophie. Don't let her get dragged into this. Don't let the press make her a story. Promise me. I promise. But you're coming back. You're fighting and you're winning and you're coming back. Vivian's smile was tremulous and uncertain. I want to believe that. Then believe it. Because I'm not letting you go that easily. They kissed again, and Ryan tried to memorize everything. The way she fit against him, the sound of her breathing, the feeling of holding someone he loved who was about to walk out the door with no guarantee of return. A car honked outside. Vivian's ride to Michigan, arranged through encrypted messages and burner phones like they were in some kind of spy thriller. I have to go. I know. She picked up her bag and Pancake the unicorn, and Ryan walked her to the door. In the hallway, she turned back one more time. The first time we met, you saved me from Marcus Hendricks without knowing anything about me. You just saw someone who needed help and stepped in. That's who you are, Ryan. That's why I love you. And that's why I know you'll take care of Sophie while I'm gone. Come back to us. I will. I promise. And then she was gone, disappearing into the elevator while Ryan stood in the doorway of his small apartment, watching the woman he loved run from a father who couldn't stand to lose control. He went back inside and sat on the couch in the dark, trying to process what had just happened. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. She's safe. On the road. I'll keep you updated.
Rachel, Vivian's lawyer. Ryan texted back a thank you and set down his phone. Across the room, Sophie's drawings covered the fridge, stick figures of their family, now including a fourth person with long dark hair and a smile. In one corner, she'd drawn Pancake the unicorn with wings, flying towards something labeled home. Ryan stared at that drawing for a long time and made himself a promise. William Sterling wanted a war? Fine, he'd get one. But this time, he was fighting someone who had nothing left to lose and everything worth protecting. The next morning, Ryan dropped Sophie at school and headed straight to the address Vivian's lawyer had sent, a small office in a building that had seen better decades. Rachel Martinez was 40-something, sharp-eyed, and looked like she'd spent her career fighting battles other lawyers ran from. Mr. Carter, thanks for coming. We have a lot of work to do and not much time. She spread documents across her desk. William Sterling's petition, psychiatric evaluations from doctors Ryan had never heard of, statements from concerned family friends painting Vivian as unstable. This is a hit job, Rachel said bluntly. Sterling hired 3 different psychiatrists who've diagnosed Vivian with everything from bipolar disorder to delusional disorder, all based on social media posts and press coverage. None of them have actually examined her, which we'll argue makes their opinions worthless. But judges can be swayed by credentials and money, and Sterling has both. What do we need? Counter evidence? Testimony from people who've actually spent time with Vivian recently. Documentation that her decisions, while unconventional, aren't signs of mental illness. And most importantly, we need to show that her relationship with you is genuine and healthy, not a symptom of a breakdown. How do we do that? Rachel smiled grimly. We put you on the stand and let you tell the truth. But Ryan, you need to understand, William Sterling's lawyers will destroy you. They'll dig into every aspect of your life, every mistake you've ever made, every moment of weakness. They'll question your fitness as a father, your financial stability, your motives. Are you prepared for that? Ryan thought about Vivian driving through the night to hide in a cabin, about Sophie asking if Vivian would come back, about 3 years of surviving Rachel's abandonment and building a life from nothing. Let them try. Over the next week, Ryan became intimately familiar with the legal system's capacity for cruelty. William Sterling's lawyers filed motions, submitted evidence, and painted a picture of Vivian as a woman in crisis who'd been manipulated by an opportunistic single father looking for financial security. They brought up Rachel's abandonment, suggesting Ryan had a pattern of attracting and exploiting vulnerable women. They questioned his parenting, pointing to Sophie's questions about her mother as evidence of emotional instability in the household. They even found the teacher who'd complained about Sophie being a distraction at school and got a statement suggesting the child was suffering from the scandal. Every accusation felt like a knife. But Ryan showed up to every deposition, answered every question, and refused to let them shake his story. Why did you approach Miss Sterling at the gala? Sterling's lead attorney asked during one particularly brutal session because she looked like she needed help. You didn't know who she was. I knew she was exhausted and being cornered by Marcus Hendricks. That's all I needed to know. Convenient. A junior analyst just happens to rescue one of the wealthiest women in Chicago, and weeks later they're in a relationship. You expect us to believe that's coincidence? I expect you to believe the truth. I didn't pursue Vivian. She reached out to me. And when we started spending time together, it wasn't about money or connections. It was about 2 people who understood what it felt like to be drowning in lives they'd never actually chosen. Poetic. Did Ms. Sterling give you money? No. Gifts? No. Pay your bills? No. Yet you lost your job defending this relationship. How are you supporting your daughter? Ryan met the lawyer's eyes. Savings, unemployment, and the knowledge that teaching Sophie to choose integrity over comfort is worth more than any paycheck. The lawyer smirked. Integrity doesn't pay rent, Mr. Carter. No, but it lets me sleep at night. Between depositions, Ryan checked in with Vivian through encrypted messages. She was safe, isolated, and slowly losing her mind in the cabin. I'm going crazy up here, she wrote. I've read every book in this place twice. I've taken up woodworking. I made a birdhouse that immediately fell apart. I miss you and Sophie so much it physically hurts. Sophie misses you too.
She talks to Pancake every night before bed, telling her to remind you to come home. I'm coming home. Whatever it takes, I'm coming home. But coming home got more complicated when William Sterling escalated. He held his own press conference, standing in front of Sterling Enterprises with tears in his eyes, pleading for the public to help him save his daughter from herself.
Vivian is sick, he told the cameras.
And the man she's involved with is enabling her delusions instead of getting her the help she needs. As a father, I'm begging, if anyone knows where she is, please tell us. She needs professional care, not romantic fantasies. I just want my daughter back. The public ate it up. Social media split between hashtag Save Vivian and hashtag Believe Vivian, and suddenly Ryan was receiving death threats from people who believed he'd kidnapped and brainwashed a mentally ill billionaire. Sophie's school called again. More parents were complaining. More kids were asking questions. The principal suggested, gently but firmly, that perhaps Sophie would be better served by staying home until the situation resolved. Ryan picked her up early, and on the drive home, Sophie was uncharacteristically quiet. Some kids said you're a bad person, she finally said, that you're keeping Vivian away from her family because you want her money. Ryan pulled over, unable to drive and have this conversation simultaneously. What do you think? He asked. Sophie looked at him with those two wise eyes. I think you love her, and I think she loves us, and I think her dad is mean and lying. You're right about all of it. Then why are people being so mean to you? Because sometimes people believe lies that sound simple instead of truths that are complicated. It's easier to think I'm a bad guy than to understand that Vivian's father is the one hurting her. That's stupid. Yeah, it really is. Sophie was quiet for another moment. Is Vivian okay? She's safe, and she's fighting to come back to us. Do you promise? Ryan thought about all the promises he'd made and kept, all the times he'd showed up when it would have been easier to quit. I promise we're doing everything we can to bring her home. That night, after Sophie was finally asleep, Ryan got a call from Rachel. We have a court date, 3 days. Sterling's lawyers pushed for emergency hearing and the judge agreed. If we can't prove Vivian is competent and that her disappearance isn't proof of instability, William gets temporary conservatorship and the authority to have her involuntarily committed for evaluation. 3 days? 3 days. And Ryan, she needs to be there. If Vivian doesn't show up to defend herself, we lose automatically. She'll be there. You sure about that? Because right now, her disappearing act is the strongest evidence Sterling has that she's unstable. She'll be there, Ryan repeated. I'll make sure of it. After hanging up, Ryan sent Vivian an encrypted message. Court date in 3 days, you need to come back. Her response came immediately. I know, Rachel told me. I'm terrified. Me too. But we're doing this together, remember? Together. Okay. I'm coming home. The next 72 hours felt like preparing for war. Rachel coached Ryan on testimony, prepared character witnesses, and built a case that Vivian's choices, while unconventional, were the rational decisions of a woman finally choosing her own life. They got statements from Mrs. Chen about Sophie's well-being, from Sophie's teacher about her academic performance, from Vivian's former assistant about her competence and decision-making at Sterling Enterprises. They compiled medical records showing no history of mental illness, financial records showing Vivian's stable management of her assets, and social media posts demonstrating clear, coherent communication. And through it all, Ryan waited for Vivian to come home. She arrived the night before the hearing, slipping into his apartment after midnight, looking exhausted and scared and relieved. Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch waiting for her, and when Vivian saw her, she started crying. She's been waiting every night, Ryan said quietly. Refused to go to bed until I promised you were coming back. Vivian knelt beside the couch and gently brushed hair from Sophie's face. Sophie stirred, opened her eyes, and for a moment didn't seem to believe what she was seeing. You came back, she whispered. I told you I would. Princess Sparkle's rule. Sophie threw her arms around Vivian's neck, and Ryan watched them hold each other like they were both terrified of letting go. Did you take care of Pancake? Sophie asked. She's been very brave, told me stories every night about you and your dad. That's good. She's good at stories. After they got Sophie back to bed,
a process that took an hour because she refused to let go of Vivian's hand. Ryan and Vivian finally sat down together. "Tomorrow's going to be brutal," he said. "I know. Your father will try to paint you as unstable. His lawyers will attack everything you've said and done. And the judge will decide whether you get to control your own life or whether William Sterling gets to erase you." "I know," she repeated. "But Ryan, I've spent the last 2 weeks alone in a cabin thinking about what I actually want. And I finally figured it out." "What do you want?" Vivian took his hand, her grip strong and certain. "I want to wake up in a house that's messy and full of life, instead of a penthouse that's perfect and empty. I want to burn garlic bread and help Sophie with homework and fall asleep next to you knowing that tomorrow won't be another performance. I want normal and chaotic and imperfect. I want this, exactly this, for the rest of my life." Ryan pulled her close. "Then that's what we'll fight for tomorrow. Even if we lose? We're not losing. Your father thinks money and power win everything, but he's wrong. Because what we have, this messy, complicated, impossible thing, that's real. And real is stronger than anything he can buy." They sat together in the quiet apartment, holding each other while Chicago slept outside, and made promises they had no idea if they could keep. Tomorrow would bring judgment, verdict, and the answer to whether love could actually survive against money and power. But tonight they had each other, and for now, that was enough. The courtroom felt like a place designed to break people. Cold fluorescent lights, wooden benches that had absorbed decades of misery, and a judge's bench elevated just high enough to remind everyone who held the power. Ryan sat beside Vivian in the front row, their hands clasped so tightly his fingers had gone numb. Across the aisle, William Sterling sat with his legal team, 4 attorneys in suits that probably cost more than Ryan's entire year of rent. William's expression was carefully neutral, but Ryan saw the certainty in his eyes. He'd already won. This was just ceremony. Sophie was with Mrs. Chen, safe from whatever ugliness was about to unfold. Before they'd left that morning, Sophie had pressed Pancake back into Vivian's hands. "For luck," she'd said. "Unicorns are very lucky in courtrooms." "How do you know that?" "I just do. It's unicorn science." Now Pancake sat in Vivian's lap, slightly ridiculous in the formal setting, and Ryan loved her more for refusing to hide it. Judge Patricia Moreno entered, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every lie people could tell. Everyone stood, and Ryan felt Vivian trembling beside him. "Sit down," Judge Moreno said, scanning the room. "Let's be clear about what we're doing here. Mr. Sterling has petitioned for emergency conservatorship of his daughter, claiming she's mentally incompetent and a danger to herself. This is not a trial. This is an evaluation hearing. I'll hear evidence from both sides, and I'll make a determination. Understood?" Both legal teams nodded. "Mr. Sterling, your petition first." William's lead attorney, a man named Harrison Wells who looked like he ate junior lawyers for breakfast, stood up with a folder thick enough to be a weapon. "Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. Ms. Sterling has exhibited a clear pattern of erratic behavior over the past 2 months. She abruptly resigned from a billion-dollar company she'd successfully managed for years. She severed ties with her family and professional network. She entered into a relationship with someone she barely knew, a relationship that cost him his career and exposed his young daughter to media scrutiny. When faced with reasonable concern from her father, she fled the state and went into hiding. These are not the actions of a competent adult. These are the actions of someone in crisis." Wells presented psychiatric evaluations, social media posts, photographs of Vivian at the ice rink looking disheveled and manic, and statements from people claiming they'd witnessed her instability. Ryan watched William throughout the presentation. The man never looked at his daughter, not once. This wasn't about concern, it was about control. When Wells finished, Rachel stood up. She looked small compared to Sterling's legal army, but her voice carried steel. "Your Honor, what Mr. Wells calls erratic behavior, I call autonomy. Ms. Sterling made informed choices to leave a toxic work environment and pursue personal happiness. Those choices made her father uncomfortable, so he's weaponizing the legal system to punish her. Every piece of evidence they've presented can be explained by one simple fact. Vivian Sterling finally started living for herself instead of for William Sterling's approval." Rachel called her first witness,
Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychiatrist who'd evaluated Vivian the day before. Dr. Chen, you spent 4 hours with Ms. Sterling yesterday. What was your assessment? Dr. Chen consulted her notes. Ms. Sterling is articulate, coherent, and demonstrates excellent insight into her own mental state. She's thoughtful about her decisions and can clearly articulate her reasons for each choice she's made. I found no evidence of delusion, mania, depression, or any other condition that would impair her judgment. What about her decision to leave Sterling Enterprises? Sharat? Leaving a high-stress job that was negatively impacting mental health is actually a sign of good judgment, not poor judgment, Ms. Sterling recognized that professional success wasn't worth personal misery. That's emotional intelligence, not mental illness. Wells cross-examined aggressively. Dr. Chen, you were hired by Ms.
Sterling's legal team, correct? I was hired to provide an independent evaluation.
Independent. Yet you're being paid by the person you're evaluating. Isn't that a conflict of interest?
I'm being paid for my time, not my opinion.
My assessment would be the same regardless of who hired me. You spent 4 hours with Ms. Sterling. The psychiatrists who evaluated her for Mr. Sterling are respected professionals with decades of experience. Why should this court value your opinion over theirs? Dr. Chen's smile was razor sharp. Because I actually examined the patient. Those other psychiatrists diagnosed someone they'd never met based on newspaper articles and social media posts. That's not psychiatry. That's gossip dressed up with credentials. The courtroom stirred. Judge Moreno made a note. Next, Rachel called Mrs. Chen to the stand. Mrs. Chen, you've been working for Mr. Carter for 3 years. You've observed his relationship with Ms. Sterling firsthand. What's your assessment? Mrs. Chen sat perfectly straight, her expression serious. I've watched Ryan Carter raise his daughter alone for 3 years. He's devoted, responsible, and puts Sophie first in every decision. When Vivian came into their lives,
I was worried. Sophie had already been abandoned once. I didn't want to watch it happen again.
And Vivian Sterling is not Rachel Carter. She shows up. She keeps promises. She sits on the floor playing unicorns when she could be anywhere else. That's not manipulation. That's love. And Sophie is happier now than she's been since her mother left. If that's mental illness, then the world needs more of it. Wells tried to shake her testimony, but Mrs. Chen was immovable. She'd spent decades raising children and had no patience for lawyers who thought credentials outweighed observation. Finally, Rachel called Vivian to the stand. Ryan watched her walk to the witness box, carrying Pancake the unicorn, and felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Everything came down to this: whether Vivian could convince a judge that choosing happiness over empire wasn't insanity.
Miss Sterling, Rachel began gently,
Tell the court why you left Sterling Enterprises. Vivian took a breath. When she spoke, her voice was steady. I was drowning. I spent 30 years trying to earn my father's approval by building the company exactly how he wanted. But it was never enough. Every success was followed by new expectations. Every achievement was evidence that I could do more. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly, started having panic attacks in board meetings that I hid because showing weakness would disappoint him even more. When did you realize you needed to leave? Did you realize The night I met Ryan. I was at a gala, exhausted and drunk, and a predatory investor was cornering me. Everyone there, everyone in my life, saw me as a business opportunity.
But Ryan saw a human being who needed help, and that simple act of decency made me realize how starved I was for genuine human connection. What happened next?
Ryan and I became friends. He introduced me to his daughter. They showed me what life looked like when it wasn't a constant performance. And I realized I'd been so busy building an empire that I'd forgotten to build a life. So I made a choice. I chose the life. Rachel smiled.
Why did you go into hiding when your father filed this petition?
Because I was terrified. My father is one of the most powerful men in Chicago. He has connections, money, and the ability to make people disappear into psychiatric facilities where they lose all autonomy. Running seemed like the only way to protect myself until I could build a legal defense.
Do you regret running?
Vivian glanced at Ryan. No, because it gave me time to understand what I was fighting for. I'm not fighting to keep my company or my money or my social status. I'm fighting for the right to choose my own life. That's all I've ever wanted, the right to choose.
Wells stood up for cross-examination, and his smile was predatory. Ms. Sterling, you claim you left the company because you were unhappy. But isn't it true you were also romantically involved with Mr. Carter at that time? I was falling in love with him, yes. So this decision wasn't really about your mental health. It was about a man. It was about both. Ryan showed me what happiness looked like.
That doesn't make my decision less valid. It makes it more informed. You abandoned a billion-dollar company for a relationship that started less than 2 months ago. That seems impulsive. I didn't abandon it. I stepped away from operational control while retaining my board seat and shares. That's a carefully considered transition, not abandonment.
You fled the state when your father expressed concern. My father tried to have me imprisoned in a psychiatric facility against my will. I protected myself. That's survival, not mental illness.
Wells pressed harder. Ms. Sterling, do you acknowledge that your relationship with Mr. Carter has hurt people? That his daughter has been bullied at school? That he lost his job? Yes. And I hate that. But Ryan made his own choice to stand by me, just like I chose him.
We're adults making informed decisions together. Adults who've known each other less than 60 days. Yes. And in that time, I've learned more about myself and what I want from life than I did in 30 years of following my father's plan. Time doesn't determine value. Honesty does.
Wells tried several more angles, but Vivian held firm. She acknowledged mistakes, admitted uncertainty, but never wavered on the central truth. She was competent, informed,
and choosing her own path. Finally, Rachel called Ryan to the stand.
He'd been dreading this moment, knowing that Sterling's lawyers would try to destroy him.
But as he sat in the witness box, looking at Vivian beside her attorney, at the judge who would decide their future, Ryan felt something unexpected. Calm. Mr. Carter, Rachel said, tell the court how you met Ms. Sterling. Ryan told the story simply. The gala, Hendricks cornering her, his decision to intervene. He talked about their dinners, about Sophie meeting Vivian, about falling in love with someone who made terrible pancakes but showed up for the people she cared about. Wells practically vibrated with eagerness when Rachel finished. Mr. Carter, you were fired from your job because of this relationship, correct? I was fired because I refused to abandon someone I cared about when my bosses tried to bribe me. Bribe you with a promotion and salary increase? A promotion contingent on ending my relationship. That's not an opportunity, that's extortion. You're currently unemployed with a 6-year-old daughter to support. Isn't Ms. Sterling's money attractive? She hasn't given me $1, not one. We split dinner bills, I pay my own rent, and yeah, I'm broke and unemployed, but I've been broke before. I know how to survive without compromising who I am. Your daughter has been negatively impacted by this relationship. She's been bullied, pulled from school, exposed to media attention. As a father, don't you bear responsibility for protecting her from that? What? Why must he eat? Ryan felt anger flare but kept his voice level. I protect Sophie by teaching her that love is worth fighting for, that sometimes doing the right thing costs something, but the cost of doing nothing costs more. She's 7 years old, and she's already learned that some people will abandon you when things get hard. I'm showing her that some people stay. That's not bad parenting. That's the best lesson I can teach her. Even if staying means she suffers? She's not suffering. She's learning that the world is complicated and that her father will always choose integrity over convenience. When she's older, she'll understand that. Wells paced. Mr. Carter, isn't it possible that you've confused genuine connection with Vivian Sterling's need for validation? That you're enabling her avoidance of real mental health treatment? No. How can you be certain? Because I've lived with someone who was actually mentally ill. My ex-wife struggled with depression for years before she left. I know what mental illness looks like. And I know what it looks like when someone finally stops performing and starts living. Vivian isn't sick. She's healing. There's a difference. Judge Moreno held up her hand. I think I've heard enough. Both sides have made their cases. I'm going to take a 30-minute recess and review the evidence. The courtroom emptied for the break, and Ryan found Vivian standing on the courthouse steps, shaking. "I think I'm going to throw up," she said. "You were incredible in there." I was terrified in there. Both. You were both. They sat on the cold stone steps, and Vivian leaned against Ryan's shoulder. "What happens if we lose?" she asked quietly. "We don't lose. But if we do, then we fight. We appeal. We make so much noise that every judge in Illinois knows William Sterling tried to imprison his daughter for choosing her own happiness. We don't give up. Ryan, if he gets conservatorship, he controls everything. My money, my decisions, where I live, who I see. He could forbid me from contacting you or Sophie. I could lose years fighting to get my autonomy back." Ryan turned to face her. "Then we'll wait years. I'm not going anywhere." "You can't promise that. People don't wait years for someone they've known 2 months. I waited 3 years for Rachel to come back. I waited because I didn't know any better. This time, I'm waiting because I do. Because what we have is real, and real is worth waiting for." Vivian kissed him there on the courthouse steps, and Ryan didn't care who was watching or taking pictures. Let them see. Let the whole world see that some things mattered more than reputation. They filed back into the courtroom, and Judge Moreno returned looking grim. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented today," she began, "and I'm troubled by several aspects of this case. The psychiatric evaluations submitted by Mr. Sterling's team are based entirely on secondhand information, news articles, social media posts, hearsay. Not one of those doctors examined Ms. Sterling personally. That's professionally questionable at best." William Sterling's expression flickered, first hint of doubt. "However," the judge continued, "Miss Sterling did flee the jurisdiction when served with evaluation papers. That suggests either guilty conscience or extreme fear of the legal process. Neither reflects well on her judgment." Vivian's hand tightened on Ryan's. Vivian's hand tightened on. "That said, I've also reviewed Dr. Chen's evaluation, which was conducted properly. I've heard testimony from witnesses who've observed Ms. Sterling's recent behavior firsthand, and I've listened to Ms. Sterling herself articulate clear, rational reasons for every choice she's made." Judge Moreno looked directly at Vivian. "Ms. Sterling, I want to ask you something directly. Do you acknowledge that some of your recent decisions have been unconventional?" Vivian stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you acknowledge that leaving a successful career to pursue a new relationship could be perceived as impulsive?" "Yes, but impulsive doesn't mean incompetent." "Yes, but impulsive." "I made an informed choice to prioritize my mental health and personal happiness over professional achievement. That's not mental illness, that's self-preservation. And if I deny your father's petition, if I rule that you're competent to manage your own affairs, what will you do?" The question hung in the air. Everyone waited. Worrying. The question hung in. "I'm going to live my life," Vivian said simply. "Not the life my father designed or the life society expects. My life. I'm going to spend time with people I love. I'm going to figure out what makes me happy beyond money and power. And I'm going to make mistakes because that's what humans do. But they'll be my mistakes, made by my choice, and I'll learn from them like everyone else." Judge Moreno was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Mr. Sterling, I understand you're concerned about your daughter, but concern doesn't justify removing someone's autonomy. Ms. Sterling has demonstrated that she's capable of articulating her reasoning, understanding consequences, and making informed choices. Those choices may not align with your preferences, but that's not the legal standard for incompetence." William Sterling stood. "Your Honor, with respect." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling. I'm not finished." Judge Moreno's voice was ice. "I've seen a lot of conservatorship petitions in my career. Most are filed by families genuinely trying to protect loved ones who can't protect themselves. But this feels different. This feels like a father who's angry that his daughter won't obey him, using the legal system as punishment. Your Honor, that's completely—" "I said sit down." Judge Moreno turned back to Vivian. "Ms. Sterling, you're a 30-year-old woman with no history of mental illness, full control of your faculties, and the right to make your own choices. The petition for emergency conservatorship is denied." The courtroom erupted.
William Sterling's lawyers immediately stood, demanding appeals, emergency stays, anything to reverse the decision. But Judge Moreno just banged her gavel. This hearing is concluded. Ms. Sterling retains full autonomy. Mr. Sterling, if you want to repair your relationship with your daughter, I suggest therapy, not litigation. Ryan felt Vivian collapse against him, sobbing with relief. They'd won. Against all the money and power William Sterling could marshal, they'd won. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed immediately, but this time Vivian didn't run. She stood on the steps with Ryan beside her and faced the cameras. I have a brief statement, she said, and the crowd quieted. Today, a judge confirmed what I already knew, that choosing happiness over empire doesn't make me incompetent. It makes me human. To everyone who supported me, thank you. To everyone who believed my father's narrative, I don't blame you. He's very convincing. But I hope this shows that sometimes the most rational thing you can do is walk away from a life that's killing you. Miss Sterling, what's next for you? A reporter called out. Vivian looked at Ryan, smiled, then turned back to the cameras. I'm going to pick up a 6-year-old from school and help her with homework. Then I'm going to burn garlic bread and eat terrible spaghetti. And tomorrow, I'm going to wake up and do it again because that's what happiness looks like for me. What about Sterling Enterprises? What about it? I have a board seat. I'll exercise my voting rights. But I'm done dedicating my life to a company that never made me happy. There are better ways to spend the time I have. And your relationship with Ryan Carter? Is none of your business, but since you'll write about it anyway, yes, we're together. Yes, we're happy. And no, I don't regret choosing him over my father's approval. Next question. The press conference continued for another 10 minutes, but Ryan stopped listening. He watched Vivian handle the reporters with confidence and grace and realized she'd fundamentally changed, not broken, transformed. The woman who'd been falling apart at that gala 3 months ago was gone. In her place stood someone who knew exactly who she was and what she wanted. They picked up Sophie from Mrs. Chen's apartment, and the moment Sophie saw them, she knew. You won. We won, Vivian corrected, pulling her into a hug. All of us. Does that mean you're staying forever? Vivian looked at Ryan over Sophie's head, and Ryan saw the question behind the question. They'd fought for Vivian's autonomy, but they hadn't discussed what came next. Let's go home and talk about it, Ryan said. Home was his tiny apartment, and when they walked in, it felt even smaller with 3 people and all their complicated emotions. Sophie immediately started showing Vivian drawings she'd made while they were in court. Elaborate scenes of unicorns defeating dragons that looked suspiciously like men in business suits. After Sophie finally went to bed, Ryan and Vivian sat on the couch in the space they'd carved out of chaos. We never talked about what happens now, Ryan said. I know. I mean, we fought to prove we're real and that this relationship is genuine, but we've known each other less than 3 months. We haven't talked about logistics or future or any of the practical things. Vivian turned to face him. Do you want to know what I figured out in that cabin? What? That I don't need a perfect plan. I spent 30 years executing perfect plans that made me miserable. So instead, I'm going to try something radical. I'm going to see what happens when I just live. What does that mean practically? It means I'm selling my penthouse. It's beautiful and empty, and I hate it. I'm going to find an actual home, something with a yard and too many rooms and space for Sophie's unicorn collection to expand. Something we could all fit in, if that's something you want. Ryan's heart stuttered. Vivian, I'm not asking you to move in tomorrow. I'm not asking Sophie to call me mom. I'm just saying, I want to build a life that has space for both of you in it. However that looks. Whatever timeline makes sense. I'm done with grand gestures and dramatic declarations. I just want normal, messy, complicated normal with you. Ryan thought about his small apartment, about the life he'd built from necessity, about the careful walls he'd constructed to protect Sophie from disappointment. I'm terrified of screwing this up, he admitted, of letting Sophie get too attached and then losing you anyway, of teaching her that love works out when maybe it doesn't. What if it does work out? I've never seen that happen. Rachel left. My parents divorced. Mrs. Chen's husband died. Every love story I know ends badly. Vivian took his hand. Then let's write a different story.
Not perfect. We're both too damaged for perfect. But real, honest. Two people who keep choosing each other even when it's hard. You make it sound simple. It's not. But Ryan, I spent 30 years making complicated choices that destroyed me. Maybe simple is exactly what I need. It's but they sat in comfortable silence, and Ryan let himself imagine it. A house with a yard. Sophie running through rooms that echoed with laughter. Vivian burning garlic bread in a kitchen that smelled like home instead of performance. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Okay, he said, finally. Okay? Oh. Okay, let's try. Let's build something together and see what happens. But Vivian, if this doesn't work, if 6 months from now we realize we made a mistake, we have to be honest about it. Sophie can't survive another abandonment. Then we don't abandon her. If you and I don't work out romantically, we figure out how to still be in her life. Because you're right, she's already attached, and I'm not walking away from her regardless of what happens between us. Ryan pulled her close. You really thought about this in that cabin. I had a lot of time and no internet. Thinking was basically my only option. The next few months unfolded in ways Ryan had never imagined. Vivian sold her penthouse and bought a house in Lincoln Park, old, quirky, with a backyard big enough for Sophie's imagination to run wild. She didn't ask Ryan to move in, but they spent most nights there anyway. And slowly his apartment became storage while Vivian's house became home. Ryan found a new job at a smaller firm that actually cared about ethics over billable hours. It paid less than Patterson and Klein, but he could sleep at night, and that was worth more than money. Vivian started a foundation focused on mental health support for executives and high achievers, people who'd spent their lives chasing success and forgotten to chase happiness. She gave talks, wrote articles, and became an advocate for the radical idea that professional achievement wasn't worth personal destruction. And William Sterling? He never apologized, never reached out. But 6 months after the hearing, Vivian received a letter. She read it twice, then handed it to Ryan. Your mother would be proud of who you've become. I'm not capable of saying that myself, but it's true nonetheless. You were right to leave. I built an empire and lost a daughter. That was a poor trade. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for reconciliation. But I wanted you to know that watching you choose happiness over my approval taught me something I should have learned 40 years ago. Perhaps it's not too late for me to learn it still. Take care of yourself, Vivian, and take care of that little girl and her father. They're lucky to have you. It wasn't closure, it wasn't redemption, but it was acknowledgement, and for Vivian, that was enough. Sophie's 7th birthday arrived in October, and they celebrated at the house with a ridiculous unicorn-themed party. Vivian had learned to bake, adequately, if not well, and the cake was only slightly lopsided. Sophie declared it the best birthday of her life, which meant more than any billion-dollar deal Vivian had ever closed. That night after the guests left and Sophie was finally asleep, Ryan found Vivian in the kitchen cleaning up frosting and glitter. You know what today was? He asked. Sophie's birthday? 6 months since the court hearing, since you won your autonomy back. Vivian set down the dishcloth. Has it really been 6 months? Saw. Yeah, and you know what? We haven't had a single perfect day. We've argued about schedules and disagreed about parenting approaches and stressed about money and work and all the normal things. Is this going somewhere? Ryan smiled. Yeah. I love our imperfect days more than I ever loved the idea of perfect ones. I love that you still burn garlic bread and that Sophie still asks impossible questions and that we're all just figuring this out as we go. You're getting sentimental, shit. I'm getting honest. Vivian Sterling, will you marry me? The question hung in the air between them. Vivian stared at him, frosting still smudged on her cheek, glitter in her hair from Sophie's party. You're serious? Completely. I don't have a ring. We can pick one together. And I'm not asking you to change your name or compromise your independence. I'm just asking if you want to make this official. Make a promise in front of people we love that we're choosing each other, every day, for however long we both shall live. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. Vivian's eyes. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. You've heard others? No, but I imagine they're usually more romantic. I can try again. Get down on one knee, prepare a speech. Don't you dare. She kissed him, tasting like frosting and happiness. Yes, absolutely yes, but Ryan, I need you to understand something. What? I'm going to mess this up sometimes. I'm going to default to workaholic habits and forget that balance matters. I'm going to have moments where I question everything and wonder if I'm good enough for you and Sophie. I know. And you're going to mess up too. You're going to be overprotective of Sophie and struggle to let me help. You're going to worry about money even when we don't need to. You're going to have days where you wonder if you made the right choice. I know that too. So we're going into this knowing it won't be perfect? We're going into this knowing it'll be real. And real is better than perfect. They stood in the messy kitchen surrounded by birthday party debris, and Ryan realized this was exactly what happiness looked like. Not the glossy magazine version, but the lived-in, honest, imperfect reality of two broken people building something whole. They got married 3 months later in a small ceremony in the backyard. Sophie was the flower girl and took her job so seriously that she insisted on practicing her walk 17 times the night before. Mrs. Chen cried through the entire ceremony, and when the officiant asked if anyone objected, Sophie raised her hand. I object to the unicorn cake not having enough glitter. Can we fix that? The wedding was perfect because it was ridiculous. Because it was theirs. A year after the wedding, Vivian got a letter from the Sterling Enterprises board asking if she'd consider returning as a consultant on corporate culture and executive wellness. She read the letter, laughed, and wrote back a single sentence. I'm busy building something more valuable than an empire. But thank you for asking. She showed Ryan the response before sending it. No regrets? He asked. About turning them down? None. About leaving in the first place? Never. D8. What are you building that's more valuable than an empire? Vivian looked out the kitchen window where Sophie was in the yard teaching neighborhood kids an elaborate game involving unicorns, dragons, and social justice. A life. A real one. With people I love and work that matters, and Sunday mornings where the biggest decision is whether to make pancakes or waffles. That's more valuable than any company I could run. Even though the pancakes are still usually burnt, especially because they're burnt. Perfect pancakes would ruin everything. Ryan pulled her close, and they stood together watching Sophie orchestrate her game with the same intensity Vivian had once brought to board meetings. You know what I realized? Ryan said. What? Do? I spent 3 years after Rachel left thinking I'd failed at building a family. That something was wrong with me because I couldn't make it work. But I was building with the wrong foundation. With Rachel, it was all about appearances and expectations. With you, it's about showing up. And showing up works. That's very philosophical for 10 a.m. on a Saturday. Now, Sophie's been asking big questions. It's contagious. They spent the rest of the morning exactly how they'd spent hundreds of mornings before. Messy, chaotic, full of laughter and minor disasters, and the kind of ordinary magic that only happens when people stop performing and start living. And that evening, after Sophie was asleep and the house was finally quiet, Ryan and Vivian sat on their back porch watching the city lights in the distance. Do you ever miss it? Ryan asked. The power, the influence, the feeling of running an empire? Vivian thought about it honestly. Sometimes, usually when I'm struggling with something mundane like insurance paperwork or explaining to Sophie why she can't adopt 17 more unicorns. But then I remember what that power cost, the constant stress, the isolation, the feeling that one mistake would destroy everything. And I realize I don't miss it enough to go back. What do you miss most about your old life? The certainty. In business, you make a plan, execute it, measure results. Success is quantifiable. But this, she gestured at the house, at their life. This is all improvisation. I never know if I'm doing it right. Nobody does. That's the secret of parenting and relationships and life. We're all just making it up as we go. That's terrifying and beautiful because it means there's no wrong way to do it as long as we're honest and we keep showing up. Vivian leaned against his shoulder. I love you, Ryan Carter, for teaching me that showing up matters more than success, for giving me permission to be imperfect,
for building a life with me that's messy and real and better than anything I could have planned. I love you too, for choosing us when you could have chosen anything, for being brave enough to walk away from everything you knew, for burning garlic bread and playing unicorns and being exactly who you are. They sat in comfortable silence, and Ryan thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that first night at the gala to this quiet moment on their porch. It hadn't been smooth. It hadn't been easy. But it had been real, and real had been enough. Inside, Sophie called out from her room, "Daddy! Vivian! I forgot to tell Pancake goodnight!" They went inside together, and Vivian sat on Sophie's bed while Ryan leaned against the doorframe. "Pancake's right here," Vivian said, pressing the unicorn into Sophie's arms. "I know, but I have to tell her properly, with the special words." "What special words?" Sophie hugged Pancake tight. "Good night, Pancake. Thank you for being brave when Vivian needed you. Thank you for helping bring our family together. You're the best unicorn in the whole world." Ryan felt his throat close up. Vivian was crying again. "Those are very good special words," Vivian managed. "I know, I invented them." Sophie yawned. "Vivian, are you going to stay forever now?" "Yes, sweetheart. Forever." "Good. Because we need you. Daddy's terrible at braiding hair. We need." After Sophie finally fell asleep, Ryan and Vivian stood in the hallway outside her room. "She said we need you," Ryan whispered. "I heard. Not I need you. We. She made you part of us." Vivian wiped her eyes. "That 7-year-old is wiser than any CEO I've ever met. She learned from the best at—" They went back to their own room, and as Ryan fell asleep beside the woman he loved in the house they'd built together, he thought about the journey that had brought them here, about the gala where it started, about the press conference and the courtroom and all the moments where they could have given up but chose to keep fighting instead. And he realized something that Vivian had understood all along, that the best things in life weren't built from perfect plans or flawless execution. They were built from showing up, from choosing love over fear, from being brave enough to burn the garlic bread and try again tomorrow. 6 months later, on a Sunday morning in Millennium Park, Ryan and Vivian took Sophie ice skating for what must have been the 100th time. They fell down repeatedly, laughed until they couldn't breathe, and ate hot dogs from the same vendor who'd served them the day after the scandal broke. Sophie skated ahead, fearless and happy, while Ryan and Vivian followed at a more cautious pace. "Do you ever think about how different your life would be if you hadn't stepped in that night at the gala?" Vivian asked. "All the time. I'd probably still be at Patterson and Klein, still invisible, still surviving instead of living." "Do you regret any of it? The job loss, the scandal, all the complications?" Ryan watched Sophie execute a wobbly spin that she'd been practicing for weeks. She landed it, pumped her fist in triumph, and waved at them to make sure they'd seen. "Not for a second," he said, "because that scared, invisible junior analyst could never have imagined this. A daughter who's thriving, a wife who challenges him, a life that's messy and imperfect and absolutely worth every hard moment it took to build." Vivian squeezed his hand. The billionaire who was falling apart behind her perfect image couldn't have imagined it either. Couldn't have imagined that happiness would look like burnt pancakes and ice skating on Sunday mornings, and a 6-year-old who teaches unicorn philosophy. "Sophie's going to run for president someday with that unicorn platform. I'd vote for her." They skated in comfortable silence, and Ryan thought about the story they'd tell Sophie when she was older, about how her father rescued a billionaire who didn't need money. She needed someone to see her as human, about how that billionaire rescued him right back, by showing him that survival wasn't the same as living, about how they'd built a family from broken pieces and stubborn hope. It wasn't a fairy tale. Fairy tales were perfect, and their life was beautifully, gloriously imperfect. But it was real, and in the end, real was all that mattered. Sophie skated back to them, cheeks flushed with cold and happiness. "Can we get hot chocolate? The kind with extra marshmallows?" "Absolutely," Vivian said, "but only if we can also get hot dogs for lunch." "Deal." They left the rink together, 3 people who'd found each other against impossible odds, and built something that looked nothing like what any of them had planned, but felt exactly like home. Behind them, the city continued its endless dance, deals being made, empires rising and falling, people chasing success without knowing what it cost. But Ryan Carter, Vivian Sterling Carter, and Sophie walked away from all of it, choosing instead the simple magic of Sunday mornings and burnt garlic bread and love that showed up every single day. And somewhere in a distant corner of Chicago, William Sterling sat in his office surrounded by the empire he'd built and wondered if his daughter had been right all along. That happiness wasn't something you achieved. It was something you chose every single day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard.